No one in the territory could put a scare into Willa Hargrove. Until the morning she knelt at her own north fence and read 3 riders in the bent grass. The stalks were still wet green at the break. Hours old, not days. A man had climbed down from his saddle right there, squatted on his heels, and watched her house while she slept, while her children slept, and left nothing behind but 2 boot heels dug into the dirt and a cold, flat place where he'd waited. Inside, her 10-year-old had taken to sleeping with his boots on, and every dawn she ducked through a doorway she'd built too low on purpose, like an apology paid to her own house. She'd buried a husband under a lie 5 years back. What does a quiet widow learn? Out in a country like this, that teaches a woman her size how to move like she was never meant to be seen. Dawn came up gold over Bitter Fork and turned the mesa the color of an old penny. Willa Hargrove was already awake. She was always already awake. She ducked coming out her own front door. She had built that door frame herself 5 years back, and she had built it too low on purpose, because she had been trying to make a house that looked like everybody else's house. And she had been trying to be a woman who fit through it, so she ducked. Every morning, every single morning, like an apology she paid to her own doorway. Then she went down the steps and started her walk. The well first. Rope bucket, hand over hand, and the bucket came up a good deal faster than it had any business coming up. Then the fence line. She walked it with her fingers trailing the top rail, feeling for cracks, for rot, for the give of a post that had loosened in the night. Then the livestock. Count them again. Small rituals. The kind that keep a homestead breathing in a country that kills the careless, and has never once apologized for it. Her hands were rough as saddle leather, and steady as stone, but her eyes never quit moving. Horizon to tree line to canyon rim back down to the thin, crooked trail that came out of the hills and ran toward town, always measuring, always ranging, 400 yards to the oak, 600 to the wash, 1,100 to the ridge crest, and on a morning like this one, you would need 2 feet of wind hold to make it. She did not do it on purpose anymore. Some things you cannot unlearn. You can only stop admitting they are there. Inside the house, her son Ephraim was still asleep with his boots on. 10 on. He had started doing that a week before, and she had not asked him why, because she already knew why. Children can smell weather coming before the grown folks can. Her daughter Verity was at the stove, 16. Her father's eyes quick, dark, missing nothing. Her mother's hands, her mother's spine, nothing of her mother's size. That was the mercy of it. Verity had come out slight and quick and pretty, and Willa thanked God for it every day of her life, and hated herself a little for the thanking. Because here is a thing about Bitter Fork that I am ashamed to write down. My name is Ellis Wexford. I kept the general store on that street for 22 years. I am the one telling you this, and I want that on the record before I say another word. Because there are men in this territory who will tell you and they were not. And the story they sell for whiskey money is not the story I am about to tell you. We had a name for Willa Hargrove, and it was not Willa. She heard it through the wall of the saloon. She heard it from the porch of the boarding house. She heard boys say it out loud in the churchyard, loud enough to carry, and she watched their fathers not correct them. The giantess, the heifer. Corwin's big mistake. Ephraim came home crying about it once. He was 7. He stood in that kitchen with his fists balled and his whole small face gone red, and he said, "Mama, why are you like that?" Not angry, just wrecked. Why are you like that? Willa knelt down, all that way down, until she was smaller than her own son, and she said, "You don't know, baby." Which was the truth? I don't know. Verity handled it differently. Verity put my own nephew Pike into a horse trough at the age of 11 and held him under till he squealed. And when Willa asked her why, Verity looked her mother dead in the eye and said, "Ask him." Nobody in Bitter Fork ever said the word heifer out loud in front of a Hargrove again. We still said it. We just said it quieter. Willa finished her walk that morning at the north fence, the way she always did, and that is where she found the tracks. She stopped so fast the mare behind her bumped her shoulder. Bent grass. Fresh. The stalks crushed flat and still wet that green at the break, which meant last night. Which meant hours, not days. She went down on one knee, cracked. It always snagged 3 not wild stock. not drifting cattle. Wiles Naltai stock wanders cattle mill. These three had come up the draw slow and quiet and deliberate in a line, with their riders working them careful so they would not skyline against the ridge. And then they had stopped. Willa put her hand flat in the dirt where they had stopped, and she read it like a page. The horses had stood here a long while, long enough to shift their weight, long enough that one had dropped manure, and one had chewed the grass down to nubs at the reach of his tether, long enough that a man had gotten down out of his and squatted right here. She could see the two boot heels dug in, and the flat place where he had rocked back on them, and he had sat, and he had waited, and he had watched her house, while she slept, while her children slept. Willa straightened up. Slow, the way you stand up when somebody might be sighting on you, and you do not want to give him a reason. She looked at the ridge. Nothing moved. Nothing at all. Just the wind pushing the sage around, and one hawk turning a lazy circle 1,000 feet up. But the skin between her shoulder blades was crawling, and it had a name for what it was doing, and the name was, "Somebody looked at you for a long time, and he got a good long look, Mama." Verity, from the house. Breakfast. And Willa Hargrove turned around and put a face on, just like that. Calm, easy. The face of a big, plain widow who had been out checking her fence. Coming, sweetheart. She walked back down toward the house. She did not run. She did not look at the ridge again. She filed it away. She said nothing. And everything in the world was already different, and would never be the same again. And she knew it, and she ate her breakfast anyway. They came to town that afternoon. Verity drove. Willa sat beside her, taking up 2/3 of the seat. Ephraim rode in the wagon bed with the dog. The dog's name was Deacon, gray in the muzzle, one ear that never stood upright. He had exactly one job in this world, which was to love Ephraim Hargrove. And he did it very well. Bitterfork was one street. Adelia Fisk's boarding house anchored the East End. 2 stories, white paint, gone the color of an old tooth. The church held down the West End, small, plain. A bell that came out on a freight wagon in 1868 and has rung for every wedding and every burying since. In between my store, Otis Marsh's Forge, the Bitterfork Saloon, and Sheriff Amos Dell's office with the territorial seals in the door so faded, you had to already know what it was to see it. Willa tied the mare and came in. And she ducked. My doorway, too. She ducked in my doorway. Afternoon, Mrs. Hargrove. Ellis, usual. Add 10 pound of nails. I looked up. Fixing something? Yes. I waited for more. I did not get more. That was Willa Hargrove all over. You could ask her a question and she would answer it, and then the answer would just sit there in the middle of the room and get bigger and bigger until you left. Outside. Verity Hargrove was having a different kind of afternoon. Her mother had told her to mind Ephraim, and she did. She marched him into my store and set him down in front of the penny candy and told him not to move. And I gave the boy a licorice whip on the house, because I always did. And then Verity walked back out onto the street, and she did the thing her mother had taught her without ever once calling it a lesson. She paid attention. The saloon doors were propped open to catch the afternoon breeze. Verity crossed to the water trough and started fussing with a harness strap that did not need fussing with, head down, hands busy, ears wide open. Men's voices came out of the dark of that saloon like smoke out of a chimney. He wants it clear by the end of the month. That's fast. That's what he said. That's fast, Rafe. Even for us. A pause, a chair creaking, then a third voice. Low, easy. Gravel down at the bottom of it. The spring's the key. You hold the water at Kettle Spring. You hold every acre downstream of it. Hold the water. You hold the valley. Hold the valley. A chuckle. Well, and the widow? Silence. Verity's hands stopped on the strap. She's selling, somebody said. And the gravel voice said, very quietly, almost gently. Then she'll learn what happens to folks who don't cooperate. Verity did not move. Same as the Tolliver place, the voice said. Same as the Ashcombs. Fire don't ask a lot of questions. The sheriff does what he's told, or he does nothing, and either one suits me. We've got the deputy in our pocket, and the deputy's got the sheriff's ear. It's a tidy arrangement. Verity felt the blood go out of her face. Kettle Spring. That was hers. That was the yard she learned to walk in. That was the porch her father built. That was the spring her mother hauled water from every day of her life and never once complained about. She risked one look. One. Through the grime of the saloon window. 4 men at a corner table, 3 of them she did not know, and the 4th one was Deputy Clay Rennick. Now understand something about Clay Rennick. He was 26 years old. He had a good smile, and he used it. He carried flour sacks up the steps for the church widows, and he would not take a nickel for it. 2 years back, he had pulled Willa Hargrove out of the creek when the boy went in after a frog, and the water was higher than he had figured. Carried that soaked, howling child 2 miles home, handed him over on the porch and said, "No harm done, ma'am," and tipped his hat and rode off. Willa Hargrove baked that man a pie, and there he sat, in the dark of the Bitter Fork Saloon, on a Tuesday afternoon, with his hat on the table and a stack of paper money under his flat hand, listening to 3 strangers plan to burn a woman and 2 children out of their house. He was not arguing. He was counting. Verity backed away from that window, slow, careful, heart going like a hammer on an anvil. Once, twice, once, twice. She got 2 steps. "You lost, miss?" She turned around. He stood in the saloon doorway with the dark behind him, tall, lean, gray coming in at the temples, and a scar that started at his jaw and went up under his hat and did not stop. His hand rested on his gun belt, not on the gun, just near it, the way a man rests his hand on a fence post he owns. "No, sir." Her voice came out level, which surprised her. "Watering the horse, that so?" He came out onto the porch, boots slow on the boards. "You look familiar. I've got that kind of face." He tilted his head. "Where you from?" And she made her first mistake, and she made it fast, and it was out of her mouth before she could stop it. "Kettle Spring." His eyes changed. It was the smallest thing. A tightening. A door opening somewhere behind them. The Hargrove place. "Yes, sir," and he smiled. There was not one kind thing in that smile. "Well," he said, "you tell your mama that Rafe Caro sends his regards." "I'll do that. And you tell her Colonel Kell is a reasonable man. Fair price. Cash in her hand. He don't want trouble." He came down 1 step, but his patience is a finite article. Verity said nothing. "Pretty thing like you." His voice went soft, and soft was so much worse. "Living way out there. Just you and your mama and that little brother. No neighbors close." We looked out at the street like he was admiring the weather. "Accidents are awful common out here, miss. Lamps tip over. Stoves crack. Houses go up fast in dry country." He touched his hat brim. "Be a shame." Verity Hargrove climbed up into that wagon seat, with hands that wanted to shake and did not shake. She called for her brother in a voice that was almost bored. She backed the mare out of the rail nice and easy. She turned the wagon in the street nice and easy. And she drove out of Bitter Fork at a walk, because a walk says, "I have nothing to run from." And a trot says, "I do." She did not push that mare until the last building was behind her. Then she pushed her hard. Ephraim chattered the whole way home. Licorice. A dog he had seen. Something Ellis Wexford said. He was 10 and he was happy, and he did not know one single thing about the afternoon he had just lived through. And Verity would have given her right hand to keep it that way for the rest of his life. She did not hear a word of it. She was thinking, "They want our land. They bought the law. They will kill us for it. And my mother, my quiet mother, bakes pies and hauls water, and ducks through her own front door, is standing in the road, in front of men who burn families in their sleep." Then Ephraim said, "Verity, what's that?" They had come up on the north edge of their own property. The old oak stood there, black-trunked, half dead, the only real tree for 2 miles. Ephraim was pointing at the ground. Verity pulled up. Her brother was over the side of that wagon before it stopped rolling, Deacon barking at his heels, and he ran to the base of the oak and dropped to his knees. "Verity, come look." She climbed down slow. Something in her chest had already gone cold. Some part of her that was smarter than the rest of her had gotten there first and seen it, and already started backing with a flat stone, half sunk in the earth, wide as a wagon wheel, dark on top. Not dirt dark, not shadow dark, stained. Verity had helped butcher enough hogs and enough steers in 16 years to know exactly what she was looking at. She knew the color it went at 1 week, at 1 month, at 1 year. This was years old. Rain and sun had chewed at it, and the stone had drunk it in, and it was still there. Black in the pits of the rock, and black in the grain, and it was too much. No deer bleeds like that. No hog, no steer. Something had died here. Something had died here badly. "What is it?" Ephraim asked. His voice has gone very small. Verity knelt and put her hand over the stain and did not touch it. And she started thinking about things. She started thinking about how her mother always sat with her back to a wall. Every time. Every meal. Every church service, back pew, corner seat, and Verity had thought that was because she was too for the middle of a room, and it embarrassed her. She started thinking about the scars on her mother's hands. Not work scars. Verity knew work scars. These were other. Pucker on the left palm. A slick white seam across 3 knuckles. She started thinking about how her mother could look at Il's side and tell you how far away it was and be right within 20 yards. How she could look at a rifle in a store window and tell you exactly what it would do at 800 yards. And then go quiet and change the subject. Verity, Ephraim was tugging her sleeve. What happened here? Verity stood up, brushed off her skirt. I don't know, which was a lie. Not a whole lie, a piece of one. But we're going to ask Mama. They got back in the wagon, and when they came over the rise, Willa Hargrove was already standing on the porch, arms at her sides, not moving, a woman the size of a doorway, planted, watching the road. She had been waiting. Verity could see it in the set of her shoulders from 300 yards out. Her mother had known. Somehow she had already known that today was going to be the day. Ephraim went to bed with a story and a promise. The story was about a boy who outran a bear. The promise was that everything was going to be fine. Mothers make that promise all the time. Sometimes they even believe it. Willa didn't. She came back out to the kitchen and sat down, and the chair complained under her, the way every chair she had ever sat in had complained under her. She built that one herself, out of oak, thick-legged, cross-braced. It still complained. 3 things on that table: a kerosene lamp burning low, a hand-drawn map of Pitcherfork Valley, old, soft at the folds, and the truth, which had been sitting in that house for 5 years, in the walls, under the floorboards, in the space between what a mother says and what she means. Verity sat down across from her and folded her hands and waited. Tell me what you heard, Willa said. Oh. So Verity told her, word for word. She had a good memory, Corwin's memory. Willa listened without a muscle moving in her face. When Verity finished, the silence went on so long, the lamp guttered and steadied and guttered again. And the stone, Verity said. Under the oak, nothing, Mama. That's not from hunting. No. Then what is it? Willa Hargrove looked at her daughter's face in the lamplight and did the arithmetic every parent does eventually and always gets wrong. How much truth can a 16-year-old carry? How much has she already picked up on her own? And if I don't hand it to her, who will? And what will they charge her for it? She put her fingers on the map, traced the edge of it, slow, the way you gentle a horse. Your father died there, she said. Verity's breath stopped. You said he died in town. Her voice came out thin. You said it was drifters. You said they robbed the bank and he went in after them and... I lied 2 words. Flat as a board. And Verity Hargrove felt the floor of her whole life tip about 4 degrees to the left. There's a canyon up north. She pointed. Her finger was thick and scarred, and it landed on the map exactly where it needed to land. Hidden. Natural cut. You can ride within 100 yards of the mouth and never see it. You have to know. Your father found men using it, moving stock across the territorial line at night. Cattle that didn't belong to them. Not 2 boys and a lariat. Verity. Organized. Wagons, grain. Paid men. Her hands closed on the edge of the table, and the wood creaked and connected. Connected to people who don't like witnesses. He was the law, Verity said. He was supposed to. He was the law. That's right. And the law says you go make arrests. So he took 3 deputies and he rode up there to make arrests. She stopped. 15 men were waiting. Verity's eyes went wide. 4 against 15. Box Canyon. High ground already taken. Willa shook her head. One small motion. There's a word for what that was, and the word is not gunfight. Mama, 1 deputy came back alive. Silence. He told this town it was drifters. Told them they'd been jumped on the road. He was very convincing. She looked up. He cried at the funeral. Who? Verity said. Who was he? And here is the first place the floor drops out. Willa Hargrove said. Dalton Rennick. Verity stared at her. Clay Rennick's uncle. She sat back like she had been pushed. Clay, she could not get it out. Clay Rennick pulled F out of the creek. I know. Clay Rennick carries Mrs. Fisk's flour up her steps every Saturday because her hip's bad. Clay Rennick sat at our table. I know, you fed him. I fed him. Willa agreed, and I watched him eat, and I thought about his uncle, and I said nothing. She looked at her hands. Because I had a 5-year-old boy and an 11-year-old girl, and no husband and 160 acres. And I could not afford to be right. Verity was crying. She had not noticed. She started. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was going to tell you when you were older. I'm 16. Yes. Willa's jaw tightened. You are. You knew, Verity said. All this time you knew who killed him. I knew. Then why didn't you? And she stopped. Because her mother was looking at her. And there was something in her mother's face that Verity had never seen there in her whole life. Not once. Not in 16 years. And it took her a long moment to put a name to it. It was not grief with calculation, cold and level and unhurried. The face of somebody who worked the problem all the way to the end, years ago, in the dark, and knows exactly what the answer is and has chosen not to give it. I tracked them, Willa said. I tracked the 6 weeks, the lamp hissed, after we buried your father. After this town went back to its business and decided the story was drifters, and that was the end of it. I put you and your brother with Adelia Fisk, and I told her I was going to see a lawyer in Prescott about the deed. She turned the map around so it faced her daughter. I wasn't. I found their trail on the 3rd day. It wasn't hard. They were sloppy. 15 men who have never been hunted get sloppy because being hunted is a thing you have to learn. Her finger moved across north, northeast, up into the broken country. I followed them into the cinders, then east along the rim, then down Tenaton of the flats. I lost them twice and picked them back up both times inside of a day. How? Verity whispered. Because a horse cannot help what it is. It eats. It drops manure. It puts a hoof on a rock and warns a rock, and the wet side comes up. And that wet side dries in about 4 hours in that country. And if you know that, you know how far ahead of you they are. And you know whether to run or wait. She shrugged. It was an awful easy shrug. It's arithmetic, Verity. Most things are. Verity looked at her mother, and could not find the woman she had woken up next to that morning. I sat on a ridge above their camp for 2 nights. I didn't build a fire. I didn't move in daylight. I ate cold and I drank out of a canteen, and I lay on my belly in the rocks and I watched them. Her eyes had gone somewhere else. 15 men. I learned their names. I learned which one snored and which one couldn't sleep, and which one got up twice a night to make water. I learned who had the good eyes and who was deaf on the left side. I learned their whole watch rotation. Silence. On the 3rd night, I went down. Verity's hand went over her mouth. I got inside 30 feet of their fire, Willa said. Behind a boulder. Close enough to hear them chew, she stopped. For a while, she did not say anything at all. Just sat there with her hands flat on the wood, breathing. Then, they were telling the story. Verity waited. Men do that. After, they tell it, and they tell it again. And it gets funnier every time. Because if it stays true, it will eat them alive. So they sand it down until it's a story instead. Her voice had gone very quiet. They were telling the story of how your father died. Verity did not breathe. One of them, Willa said, was doing the voices. Something in that room went cold. He was doing your father's voice. Willa's eyes came up. He was making it high, making it beg, making them laugh. Verity's whole body had gone rigid, and they laughed, all of them. And the fire popped, and one of them threw a bone into it. And they laughed. She sat back. I could have killed 6 of them from where I was standing, she said. Maybe 8. I had a knife and a pistol and 30 feet in the dark. I'd have gotten 6 or 8 before anybody understood what was happening. And then I'd have been in among them. And it would have been over one way or the other inside of a minute. Why didn't you? Willa looked at her daughter. Because you were 11, she said. And Ephraim was 5. And Adelia Fisk was watching you both. And she had no idea I was 200 miles away, lying in the rocks with a knife in my teeth like an animal. She swallowed. Because your father's last words weren't avenge me. Verity's face came apart. They were protect them. So I climbed back up out of that camp the same way I came down. And I lay on that ridge until first light. Her voice had gone flat again. Working. And at first light I put my rifle on the man who had been doing the voices. Verity stared. 600 yards. Little crosswind left to right. He was standing by the picket line with the cop in his hand, and I had him, center of the chest. He did not have 1 second left in this world, and he had no idea. The lamp burned. I sat there with my finger on that trigger for what felt like an hour, Willa said. It was probably 10. She looked at her hands, and then I put 3 shots into the dirt at his feet. Verity's mouth opened. Nothing came out. One in front of him, one behind him, one between his boots. Willa's mouth moved. It was almost a smile. Was the most frightening thing Verity had ever seen. They went to ground like quail. 15 grown men flat on their bellies screaming where, and there was nowhere. 600 yards is a long way. They never saw a thing. Not a flash. Not smoke. Nothing. She folded her hands. And I got up and I walked away and I came home to you. Verity was crying openly now and did not care. Why? She said. Why the dirt? Why not? Because if I had killed him, I would have killed all of them. Silent, I know myself, Verity. I would have gone down that ridge, and I would not have stopped until every man in that camp was cold. It would have taken me 3 days. She let that sit. And I would have enjoyed 2 of them. She reached across the table and put her enormous hand over her daughter's small one. And then I'd have come home to my children, she said. And I'd have been a different woman than the one who left. And you would have known. She squeezed once. Children always know, so I gave them a warning instead of a war. And I buried my guns in the barn under 200 pounds of feed sack. And I came home, and I started baking pies. She got up. And that is when Verity noticed. Her mother had picked up the lamp to carry it to the shelf, and the light on the wall was moving slightly. Just a tremble, because her mother's hand was shaking. They rode north at first light. Ephraim stayed. Willa would not send him to town. She did not trust the road anymore, so she left him in the yard with Deacon and told him to stay inside the fence and not go past the barn for any reason on this earth. He said, yes, ma'am. He meant it too. He was 10 and he was scared and he meant it. The canyon country got rough fast. Willa rode ahead, and Verity followed and watched where her mother put the mare's feet, because her mother put them in strange places, around patches of ground that looked solid as a church floor, over ledges that looked like nothing at all. Willa never said a word about it. Not one. That was how she taught. They left the horses a quarter mile out and went in on foot. And here is the thing Verity would remember for the rest of her life. Her mother 6'6", 240 pounds of her, a woman who could not walk into a room without every head turning moved through that broken rock without a sound. Not a scuff, not a pebble, not one whisper of cloth. Verity, who weighed 110 and had been sneaking out of that house since she was 12, sounded like a dropped stove. She never once got told to be quiet. She just got quieter. On her own, out of shame. 20 minutes in, Willa raised one hand. Stop. The canyon opened out ahead into a wide round bowl where spring runoff had scooped a natural corral out of the rock, walls sheer on every side. The sky overhead was a blue ribbon about as wide as a wagon road, and the bowl was in use. Wagon ruts, fresh, cut deep, empty grain sacks. A fire pit still ticking with heat under a crust of ash. A picket line strung between 2 stakes with the ground beneath it chopped to powder by hooves. And on the far wall, painted in whitewash, gone the color of dried blood, a mark. A closed circle with a bar through it. The same mark Verity had seen stitched into Rafe Caro's vest. Willa knelt by the ruts and put 2 fingers in the track. 3 wagons. Loaded heavy. 2 days, maybe 3. Cattle? Not cattle. She studied the depth of the cut. Cattle walk. Something's riding in those wagons, and it's heavy, and they don't want it seen. She stood. She looked up at the walls. When Verity watched her mother's eyes track the rim, left to right, and stop in one place. A shelf of rock about 40 feet up on the western wall, with a lip of stone in front of it like a windowsill. Willa looked at that shelf for a long time. What? Verity said. Nothing. It was not nothing. Verity understood years later exactly what her mother had been doing. The thing she did without meaning to, the way another woman might hum. She was finding the firing position. Our land sits right on top of this, Verity said slowly, turning around, orienting, building it in her head, the north fence that's above this. If we rode our own fence line at night, we'd hear the wagons. Yes, that's why they want us gone. Her stomach turned over. It's not the water. It's that we're the only ones close enough to notice. Did not answer, because Willa Hargrove had walked to the far end of that bowl and stopped. There was another stain on the rock there, older than the one under the oak, bigger. It ran down a slab of granite in a wide and it pooled into a crack at the bottom, and the crack was black with it, and it always would be. Willa stood over it and did not move. "This is where they killed him," she said. Verity came up beside her. 5 years she had been carrying a face that was already going soft at the edges. A jaw, a laugh, a hand on the top of her head. A man she was losing a little more of every year and hating herself for it. And here he was. Right here. She put her fingers on the rock, and it was warm from the sun, and that was somehow the worst part of the whole thing. "He tried to surrender," Willa said. "Dalton Rennick told me that much before he took his money and ran. Your father put his gun in the dirt and told them they could ride out. Said he'd give them a day." She looked at the stain. "They shot him anyway, and then they shot him again. And then a man stood over him and did it a third time. That's the one that made the mark on this rock. Silence. And I have thought about that third shot every night for 5 years. Hooves." Both of them heard it at once. Coming fast, up the canyon, from the far entrance. Willa's hand closed on Verity's arm, and she moved her, lifted her, honestly one hand, off her feet and into a crack between two boulders, like a woman putting a book back on a shelf. Then Willa folded herself into the shadow behind her, all 6.5 feet of her, and went perfectly still. 4 riders came into the bowl. The man in front rode a gray gelding and sat it easy, one hand loose on the reins, tall, lean. A scar that went up under his hat and did not stop. Verity's whole body seized. Rafe Caro. He was off his horse before it stopped. He did not speak. That was the thing. That was the thing that turned Verity's blood to river water. He did not say one word. He just walked to the wagon ruts and squatted and put his fingers in the same track Willa had touched not 10 minutes before. And then he raised 2 fingers and made a small circling motion in the air, and his men fanned out without being told. Verity stopped breathing. Caro stood, turned a slow circle. His eyes came up the western wall and along the rim and down the eastern face and passed directly over the crack where they were standing. Verity felt her mother's hand move to the knife at her belt. She felt it very clearly, the shift of weight, the settling. Her mother was not scared. Her mother was choosing a first man, Rafe, one of the riders. Could be anybody. Hunters? Caro did not answer him. He pulled a watch out of his vest and looked at it, and his jaw tightened. He snapped the watch shut, and he tipped his head toward the horses, and they went, and Verity did not hear the sound of that man's voice, not once, which is the only reason any of what came after was possible. They came out of that canyon fast and mounted faster. Willa said nothing for 2 miles. Then, without turning around, "You did well." Verity opened her mouth to answer. And that is when they crested the rise above our own homestead. And both of them saw the smoke. It was not the chimney. Chimney smoke goes up thin and blue and lazy. This was black. This was low. This was rolling. Willa Hargrove put her heels into that mare. And Verity had never in her life seen her mother ride like that. Huge and terrible, and low over the horse's neck, closing the ground in a straight line, straight through the sage, straight over the wash. No trail, no path. Gone, they came down into that yard at a dead run. The chicken coop was fully involved. Somebody had gone at it with kerosene. You could smell it under the burn. That sweet, oily stink, and it had gone up so fast. The birds had not even scattered. Most of them were still in there, and sitting on the porch steps, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around them, was Ephraim Hargrove, deacon beside him, barking at the fire horse. Out of his mind, the boy's face was streaked white through the soot there the deers had run. Willa hit the ground before the mare had stopped. She crossed that yard in 4 strides and went down on her knees in front of her son, and her hands were on his shoulders, his arms, his face, turning him, checking him. "Are you hurt?" "No." Did they touch you?" "No, Mama." "Did they touch you?" "Ephraim, they didn't even look at me." And the boy came apart. 3 men had ridden into that yard, not fast, not shouting. They walked their horses in easy like neighborses. One got down, took a can off his saddle, walked to the coop, unhurried, poured it down the wall, corner to corner, and then along the base. Then stepped back and lit a match on his thumbnail and flicked it. And they sat on their horses and watched it catch. One of them looked over at the 10-year-old boy, standing frozen by the barn with a stick as his hand. He did not draw. He did not threaten. He just said, loud enough to carry in a conversational voice, "Tell your mama." Next one's the house, with then still conversational, with y'all in it. And they rode out laughing. Verity was already at the well. Bucket down, bucket up, run, throw, run back. Her arms burned. The coop was gone, and she knew the coop was gone. She was not fighting for the coop. She was fighting to keep it off the barn. And the barn was 30 feet away, and the wind was wrong. And then her mother was beside her. Willa Hargrove looked at the well, looked at the fire, looked at the water trough, 6 feet of hollowed cottonwood, full to the brim, 400 pounds of it easy. She set her feet. She got her hands under the lip. And Verity Hargrove watched her mother pick up that trough. Not tip it, not drag it, pick it up. The tendons stood out on her forearms like cable. Her whole back went to iron under the wet cloth of her dress. She came up out of her knees with a grunt that Verity felt in the ground through her boots, and she took 4 steps, and the water sloshed out over her shoulders and down her front, and she never broke stride, and she threw it. The whole thing, trough and all. 400 pounds of water hit the burning wall of that coop, and the fire screamed and went to steam, and the wall came down flat. The steam went up in a white tower 40 feet high, and the barn did not catch. The trough landed in the mud and cracked down the middle and lay there. Willa Hargrove stood in the smoke, with her hands hanging at her sides, breathing hard, soaked through, black to the elbows. And her son and her daughter looked at her, and neither one of them said a word. Deputy Clay Rennick rode out the next morning. He came alone, in the open, with his hat in his hand before he was even off the horse, ma'am. I heard about the coop. Willa said nothing. I need to take a statement. Official. Sheriff's orders. He looked at the black wreckage and shook his head. And he did it well, God Almighty. With the boy right there. He was 26 years old, and he had a good smile, and he was very, very good at this. Verity stood on the porch and watched him, and something in her chest was screaming, and she could not have told you what it was screaming about. Come inside, Willa said, because what else was she going to say? She went out to the barn to bring the ledger, the one with the tally of hens, because you have to have numbers. Official statements need numbers, and Verity went with her, because her mother told her to. 4 minutes. Clay Rennick was alone in that house for 4 minutes. And Verity Hargrove would live to be 81 years old, and she would think about those 4 minutes about 1,000 times a year, every year, for the rest of her life. He came down out of the hills that afternoon. They saw him a long way off, because he wanted them to. He came down the open trail in plain sight at a walk, one hand on the horn, taking his time. Willa was on the porch with the sharps across her knees, before he got within 400 yards. Then she looked through the glass, and she set the rifle down, and she said a word. Verity had never once heard her mother say. His name was Judah Fenn. He was somewhere past 70, and he looked like a fence post that had learned to ride. Skin like a saddlebag. One eye milky, one eye sharp as a hawk's. He got down off that horse in about 4 separate installments, and every one of them hurt. He looked at the burned coop. He looked at the cracked trough lying in the mud. He looked at the woman on the porch, and he spat tobacco into the dirt. And he said, "Heard you'd gone soft, Judah. Chickens?" He shook his head. "Pies. Woman I knew could gut a man and eat her supper after. That woman's dead." "That woman," said Judah Fenn. "Just through a water trough he would not come inside. Said houses made him itch, so they sat out on the porch, and he drank Willa's coffee and made a face at it and drank it anyway. And Verity sat on the step and looked back and forth between them and understood that she was watching 2 people speak a language she did not know. "Kel," Judah said, "you've heard. I hear everything. I don't do nothing about most of it. Advantage of being old, he worked the tobacco. But I heard Augustus Kell put a mark on the Hargrove place, and I got on a horse. Why?" The old man looked at her with that one good eye. "You know why?" He turned to Verity. "Girl, sir, you know what your mama was?" Judah. Willa started. "She's 16. She's got a rifle in the house and men in the yard, and she is going to find out inside of a week. Whether we tell her or not, he never took his eye off Verity. You want it clean, or you want it ugly." Verity looked at her mother. Willa Hargrove looked out at the ridge for a long moment, then she nodded. "Once, you ever hear tell," Judah Fenn said, "of the ghost gun?" Verity blinked. "That's a story, is it?" "That's Otis Marsh tells that one at the forge when it's slow." The scout in the Apache campaigns who could hit a man at 1,000 yards and nobody ever saw a face. They said the army never even had a name in the book. They said soldiers used to leave tobacco out on the rocks for it, like you'd leave milk for a she. Stopped. Judah Fenn watched her get there. They left tobacco, he agreed. They surely did. And I smoked most of it. There was a column out of Fort Whipple, he said. Summer of '63. 200 men. I was scouting for them, and trailing along behind us was a laundress's girl, 21 years old, 6.5 feet tall, and every man in that column laughed at her. He drank his coffee. I laughed at her. Verity had gone very still. And then one morning I lost the trail on Hardpan. 200 men, 12 miles of nothing, when my sign was gone. And that girl walked out ahead of me about 40 feet and squatted down and put her hand flat on a rock and said, "They turned here 4 hours ago. They're leading the horses because one's gone lame in the near fore." He shook his head slowly, and she was right. They wouldn't take her, naturally. Armies got rules. So they didn't take her. They just used her, paid her out of the mess fund, and never once wrote her name in a book. He looked at Willa, which turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to her, because when she started shooting, there wasn't a name to attach to it. Judah, 1,100 yards, he said it straight to Verity. Standing target. Crosswind. She put it through his chest, and she was 2 ridges away, and nobody in this world saw where it came from. And those men started saying there was a ghost in the rocks, and they believed it. And that belief kept 200 boys lost walking upright for 3 more months in country that should have killed every one of them. He set the cup down. "Your mama is the ghost gun," he said. "There never was any ghost. There was just a great big girl nobody could look at without laughing, who taught herself to disappear." Verity turned and looked at her mother, at 6'6" of her, at the woman who could not walk into a church without every head in it turning, who could not stand at the back of a room, who could not fit through a doorway, or sit in a chair, or ride in a wagon without the whole world noticing the most visible person in the entire valley. And she had spent her life learning how to not be seen. Verity opened her mouth. "Closed it, Mama," she said. "That's the..." And she could not finish it. She did not have the word for it. She was 16. Willa Hargrove finished it for her quietly, looking at the ridge. "That's the joke," she said. "Yes." She rode into Bitter Fork alone on the 4th day. She told Verity it was for nails, and she was not lying. She needed nails. She needed 11 other things too, and every one of them was for the same purpose. And if I noticed that Willa Hargrove was buying lamp oil and lead and 100 feet of good rope, and every box of .50 caliber cartridge in my store, I had the sense God gave me, and I wrote it in the ledger, and I said nothing. She was standing at my counter, with the nails in her hand when she heard it. Through the wall, the saloon was next, and the one follows in Bitter Fork were pine board, and the pine board had shrunk. Voices came through those gaps the way water comes through a cracked pot. A man laughing, and then a man saying, in a voice with gravel down at the bottom of it. So he goes down on one knee, and he's got that badge on, and he holds it up like it's a shield, like it's going to do something, and laughter. And the gravel voice went high and thin, mocking, doing a voice you boys can ride out. "I'll give you a day." More laughter. "Willa Hargrove did not move, Mrs. Hargrove," I said. She did not move. She was standing in the middle of my store, with 10 pounds of nails in her right hand. And she was not in my store at all. She was 30 feet from a fire in the cinders with a knife in her teeth and her cheek in the dirt. 5 years ago, listening to a man do her husband's voice and make 15 men laugh, the same voice. Voice, Mrs. Hargrove, is the paper sack in her hand tore. 10 pounds of cut nails went across my floor and rang and scattered and rolled, and I jumped a foot. And Willa Hargrove stood there in the middle of them and stared at nothing at all. "Ma'ams," I said carefully, "you want to sit down?" She looked at me, and I, who had known that woman 5 years, who had sold her flour and thread and lamp wicks, who had never once seen her raise her voice, took a step back behind my own counter, because there was nothing in her face. Nothing, not grief, not rage, just a kind of enormous, terrible stillness, like a canyon before it echoes. "No," she said, "I'll pick them up." And she got down on her hands and knees on my floor, all of her, and she picked up every nail, one at a time. In perfect silence, it took 11 minutes, and I stood behind that counter the entire time and did not offer to help. And I have told my wife the truth exactly once, which is that I could not have moved if the store had been on fire. He was there. Verity looked up from the table that night. Rafe Caro. He was there the day your father died. You're sure? I'm sure. How can you? Because I have been listening to that voice in my sleep for 5 years, Willa said. And today I heard it through a wall. And my hands still work. And I did not go through that wall. She sat down. The chair complained. And you will never know what that cost me. He was one of the 15. He's the one who was doing the voices at that fire. He's the one I had in my sights at 600 yards. He's the one whose boots I put a bullet between. Verity said, does he know? And Willa Hargrove laughed. It was not a good sound. That's the beautiful part, she said. He doesn't know a thing. He never saw me. Not that day in the canyon. Not that morning on the ridge. Not once in his life. 600 yards, Verity, and no muzzle flash in daylight, and the wind carrying the report away from him. She spread her hands. As far as Rafe Caro knows, on a morning in 1875, the ground came alive and tried to kill him 3 times. They talked about it for years. I heard it twice, secondhand, in towns 200 miles apart. It got bigger every time. By the 3rd telling, it was 6 shots. By the 4th, it was 1,000 yards. She looked at her daughter. There's a man riding around this valley right now who has been afraid of a ghost for 5 years. Verity's voice came out very small. And the ghost bakes him pies. The ghost, Willa Hargrove agreed, bakes him pies. It was past midnight when Verity woke up. She had heard something. Not a sound outside. A sound inside. Small, dry, rhythmic from the kitchen. Over and over, she went to the door barefoot and looked through the crack. Her mother was at the table. The Sharps was in pieces in front of her. Breech open, barrel out of the stock, a rag, and a can of oil at her elbow. She had dug the whole thing out from under 200 pounds of feed sack, and the burlap was still stuck to the case when there was dirt on the table. Willa Hargrove was cleaning her rifle, and her hands were shaking, not a tremor, not a flutter, shaking, both of them. Bad enough that the cleaning rod rattled against the muzzle. Bad enough that she had to set it down twice and press her palms flat against the tabletop and wait until they quit. Verity stood in that doorway and watched her mother, the biggest, strongest, most frightening human being she had ever seen in her life, sit alone in a kitchen at midnight and lose control of her own hands. She watched her pick up a cartridge and drop it. Watched her pick it up again. Watched her get it into the block on the 3rd try. And then Verity did a thing she had never done. She pushed the door open and she walked in. Her mother did not still. How long? Verity said. Nothing, Mama. How long? Willa Hargrove looked down at her own hands lying flat on that table, like 2 dead things, and she said, 5 years. Since the war? No, Verity waited. It wasn't the war. Her mother's voice had gone strange. Thin. I killed 11 men in the war, and my hands never shook once. Not once. I could put a round through a coffee cup at 800 yards the day after and eat my breakfast with the same hand. She turned her palms up, looked at them. It started on that ridge in the cinders, she said. The morning I put 3 shots in the dirt. Verity did not understand, and then she did. And when she did, something inside her chest folded up. It came on the 2nd I took my finger off that trigger, Willa said. I let him live. I let all 15 of them live. And I stood up on that ridge, and I picked up my rifle, and I could not hold it. She closed her hands. I have never been able to hold it since. She looked up at her daughter. You understand what I'm telling you? No. The mercy did it, Verity. Her voice cracked. It was the first and only time it did, not the killing. The mercy. She wiped her face with the flat of her wrist. I chose to let a man live who did not deserve it, and it broke something in me that 4 years of war could not touch. And I would make the same choice again tomorrow. And I do not know if that makes me a good woman or the biggest fool who ever drew breath. The lamp burned, and now he is riding around my valley, Willa Hargrove said, threatening my daughter on a saloon porch. She picked the rifle back up, and this time it went smooth. And she worked the action once chunk, and the sound was clean and heavy and final. She raised it, sighted on the lamp, lowered it, and she said, nobody, in the empty kitchen, in the dark. All right, morning, the 5th day. Willa was on the porch when Verity came out, the sharps across her knees, a whetstone beside her, a knife Verity had never seen before, and a box of cartridges standing open like a box of chocolates. She was looking at the ridgeline. Mama, Verity sat down on the step below her, which put their heads about level. It always had. It was the only place in the world where their heads were level, and Verity had figured that out when she was 9 and had been sitting there ever since. "There's a church meeting Sunday," she said. Mrs. Fisk sent word. "Kell's sending a lawyer. He's going to make an offer for the whole valley, I know. People are going to sell sign. I know that too." Verity turned and looked up at her. "What are you going to do?" Willa Hargrove did not answer right away. She sat there in the gold light with a rifle across her knees and her hands quiet at last, when she looked out at 160 acres of hard gravel ground that a small man named Corwin Hargrove had bought with everything he had because he wanted his children to watch the sun come up over something that belonged to them. Below the porch, the burned coop was a black scar. Beyond it, the cracked trough lay in the mud. And past that, half a mile north, under a dying oak, there was a flat stone with her husband's death soaked into it. Would still be when everybody now living was gone. "I have spent 5 years," Willa Hargrove said, "trying to be a smaller woman than I am." She stood up. She stood all the way up, and the porch boards took her weight and groaned, and she was 6'6" in her bare feet, and the sun was behind her, and her shadow went out across that yard and covered the burned coop entirely. "I ducked through my own door. I built my own chairs. I sat in the back pew, and I made myself round-shouldered so I wouldn't tower. And I baked pies for Menahol. He called me a heifer behind my hand, and I said thank you when they took a slice." She looked down at her daughter. "I did all of that," she said, "because I thought if I made myself small enough, the world would let me keep you." She worked the action on the sharps. "Chunk, it won't." She stepped down off that porch, and she did not duck. She went out into the yard, and she did not stoop, and she did not round her shoulders. She walked past the burned coop and the broken trough, and out toward the north fence, where 3 men had sat on their horses, and watched her house while her children slept. Verity Hargrove watched her go, and in her whole life she would never forget the shape of her mother against that morning sky. Not a widow, not heifer, not the giantess of Bitter Fork. Something this valley had never had a name for. The church filled slow. It always filled slow. Frontier folk take their time about everything, including God. But that Sunday they came early, and they came quiet, and they filled every pew, and then they filled the walls. And by the time the bells stopped ringing, there were men standing 3 deep at the back with their hats in their hands. 200 people in a room built for 90. Nobody had to be told why. Willa Hargrove came in last. She always came in last. She had learned it the way you learn to walk on a bad ankle. Because if she came in first, she had to walk the whole aisle with 200 pairs of eyes going up and up and up. So she came in last and took the back corner and sat down. When the pew groaned, somewhere in the middle of that church a boy giggled, and a hand came down on him, and it stopped Verity beside her. Ephraim on the other side, small and scrubbed and scared, and behind them standing, because he would not sit in a church, Judah Fenn. Haddock chewing Otis Marsh caught Willa's eye from across the aisle. Big man, blacksmith's arms. Shiloh, 62, and he still limped in the cold. He nodded. Was the smallest thing in the world, and it meant stay after. And in the front pew sat a man in a gray suit with a watch chain and boots. Had never once seen a stirrup. His name was Bertram Voss, and he had come to buy the valley. Sheriff Amos Dell called the meeting to order, and he did it badly. 58 years old, a good face and no chin. He stood up in front of his own valley with his hat in his hands, and he said, "Folks, this here's Mr. Voss. He's got a proposition. I'd ask you to hear it civil." And then he sat down fast. Because he couldn't stand the looking, Bertram Voss rose. And he beamed. "My friends," he said. "What a country. What a country. I came in on the Prescott Road this morning, and I said to my driver, those people out there, they built this. Nobody said anything, and that is precisely why I've come." He laid one hand over his heart. "Because Colonel Augustus Kell does not intend to take anything from you, good people. He intends to pay you. He let it sit. Fair market value," said Bertram Voss. Plus 20%. Room made through sound, not a word. A sound. 200 people breathing in at once. Because Fair Market plus 20 was not a small thing. Fair Market plus 20 was a wagon and a team and new start in California. It was your boy's schooling. It was your wife's doctor. It was your account at my store, wiped clean with money left over. And God forgive me, my hand went to my collar. Willa saw it. And relocation, covered entirely, Voss went on. The Colonel is a generous man, and he is not a patient one. So I would ask that decisions be made inside of 30 days, and if we don't sell, Otis Marsh, standing, arms crossed. Shiloh in his voice, Voss smiled at him like a favorite nephew. Then you miss an extraordinary opportunity, sir. That's all. The Colonel intends to proceed with or without unanimity. Proceed how? Proceed legally, like at the Tolliver place? The room went cold. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. The Tolliver place burned. A woman's voice, fourth row. Old Pettibone Tolliver got out with his nightshirt and his dog, and nothing else, and now he's deeds of the pneumonia in Prescott. A tragedy. The Ashcombs sold for 40 cents on the dollar 3 weeks after their barn went up. Also a tragedy. Voss raised one finger, gentle as a schoolmaster. And I would note that both of those tragedies are precisely what the Colonel's protection is for. Frontier life is dangerous, madam. Fire does not discriminate. No, said Otis Marsh. It don't. But somebody's sure been aiming it, and Bertram Voss turned to the sheriff and spread his hands and said, Sheriff Dell, is there an investigation? And Amos Dell sat in his chair in front of 200 of his neighbors and opened his mouth, and nothing came out, and every soul in that room watched it happen. Watched a good man with no chin discover, in public, that he had no spine either. No, Amos Dell said finally. No formal investigation. There you are, said Bertram Voss. Let us put it to a vote, Voss said. All in favor of accepting the Colonel's. Wait, one word. And the room stopped, because it came from the back, and it came from low, from a woman's, and it was quiet, and it carried into every corner of that building like Susan, dropped a still pond. 200 heads turned, and Willa Hargrove stood up, understand what that looked like. She came up out of that back pew like something surfacings, slow, unhurried, up and up until her head was a foot above every man standing at the back wall, until the roof beam was close enough that she had to tilt, until she filled the whole back of that church the way weather fills a sky. Bertram Voss looked at her, and his mouth came open about a quarter inch. Nobody had told him about this. Nobody had told him about this. Before we vote, Will, Zilla said. I've got a question for Mr. Voss, of course, Mrs. Hargrove. Mrs. Hargrove. She started up the aisle. She did not hurry. She just came. And the pews on either side of her leaned back, actually leaned. Men pulling their shoulders in as she passed, and one boy in the third row grabbed his father's sleeve with both hands. She stopped 10 feet from Bertram Voss. He was 5'7". He had to look up at an angle that made his collar dig into his throat. My property includes the spring at Kettle Spring. Yes. Yes. And I'd say the offer on your parcel would be particularly. I notice you haven't mentioned water rights. Silence. Water rights, Voss said, would naturally transfer with the deed. Naturally, yes. And the families downstream, the ones who irrigate off that spring, the Wexfords, the Hales. What's left of the Ashcombs? What happens to them? Arrangements would be made. What kind of arrangements? Suitable free access? Smile flickered. It was there, and then it wasn't, and then it came back, and it was a lesser thing, paid access, Willa said. Nothing or no access. The room had gone so quiet, you could hear the flies, Mr. Voss. That spring is the only reliable water in this valley. It does not go dry in August. It has not gone dry in 60 years. Every acre in Bitter Fork drinks off it. One way or another, she looked around, at me, at the Hales, at the men standing along the wall. Hold that water, she said, and you don't have to buy anybody's land at all. You just wait. You wait one dry summer, and you buy it for nothing. Because a man with no water isn't a landowner. She let it land. He's just a fella standing on dirt. Somebody said, Jesus us. Voss, that is a deeply uncharitable. I've got another question. Mrs. Hargrove, where's the Colonel? Voss stopped. I beg your pardon? Colonel Augustus Kell. Where is he? Right now. This minute. The Colonel's business interests are. Because if he's such a generous man, Willa said, with everybody's best interest so close to his heart. Seems to me he'd come stand where you're standing and say it to our faces. She took one step closer. Voss took one back. He did not mean to. His body did it for him. Makes a person wonder, she said. What kind of man hires a lawyer to make his promises, and hires other men to make his threats? You will not. His voice cracked, and he hated it. You will not stand in a house of God and slander. My husband died in this valley. The room stopped breathing 5 years ago. In the North Canyon. Shot down trying to arrest men who were running wagons through that canyon. In the dark, she turned, slowly. Looking at us. And this town buried him, told itself a story about drifters, and went back to its business and slept fine. And 200 people looked at the floor. I'm not selling, Willa Hargrove said. Mrs. Hargrove, be reasonable. Not for 20%. Not for double. Not for every dollar Augustus Kell has ever made. She looked down at Bertram Voss. My husband is in that ground, and her voice never rose. Not once. That is the thing that broke us. It never once rose. And I will not sell the dirt he's buried under to the man who put him there. The church came apart. Half of it. Stop shouting. Voss was hammering the pulpit with the flat of his hand. Amos Dell was on his feet with his arms up, calling for order, getting none. And then Otis Marsh stood on a pew. I stand with the widow, he said. My forge ain't for sale. Adelia Fisk got up next. 60 years old, 5 foot nothing, a hip like a rusted hinge. Neither's my house, she said. My husband's at Gettysburg, in the ground. I did 'em west to kneel down to some colonel. She spat the word. And then it went quiet, because everyone was waiting one by one, not at everybody, not even half. The Hendersons stood. The Wrights, the young couple who bought the old Peterson's place last spring, too new to know better, stood. And the girl's hand was shaking, and she stood anyway. Ellis Wexford did not stand. I sat in the 5th row with my hands on my knees and my eyes on the floor, and I did not stand. And everybody saw it, and I knew everybody saw it. And I have carried it every day since 6 families. 6 families out of 23, 6 families. In a valley that Augustus Kell had already bought 30 men to take. Bertram Voss gathered his papers with hands that would not hold still. You have 1 week, he said. 1 week to reconsider. After that, I am instructed to inform you. The colonel's patience is exhausted. He went for the door, and he had to go past Willa Hargrove to do it. He stopped, right beside her. He came to her collar P-bone, and he looked up and said very quietly, so only she could hear, You have no idea what you have just done. And Willa Hargrove looked down at him and said, I've got some idea. They sold. God help us, we sold. Not that day. Not all at once. It came the way a riverbank gives way in a flood. A little at first. Then a chunk then. All of it the Hendersons sold on Tuesday. They had stood up in that church. They had stood up and said no, and Willa had looked across the aisle and felt something in her chest go warm. And on Monday night, somebody put a bullet through their front window while the family was at supper. No body was hit. The bullet went into the wall 6 inches above their 4-year-old's head. They sold Tuesday morning and were gone by Thursday. Amos Henderson would not look at Willa Hargrove in the street. She never blamed him. Not one day in her life. And she thought about that bullet in that wall, 6 inches above that little girl's head, about 4,000 times. The Wrights sold Friday. The girl came out to Kettle Spring to say it herself, which is more than the rest of us did. She stood in that yard with her hat in her hands, and she was maybe 22 years old, and she cried the entire time. We were going to stand, she said. We said we would. I know. I'm pregnant. Willa Hargrove put one enormous hand on that girl's shoulder, and it covered the whole shoulder and half her back. Then go, she said. Go, and don't you look back, and don't you ever be ashamed of it. 7 families sold inside of 9 days. By the second Sunday, the church was half empty, and the ones who came did not sit in the back, because the back was where Hargrove sat, and nobody wanted to be seen there. Otis Marsh drove out to Kettle Spring on the 10th day with a wagon. In the wagon, 4 crates of ammunition, 6 axe handles, 200 feet of rope, and 1 iron plate 1/4 inch thick and 4 foot square that he had made himself, and that took 3 men to load. Count, he said. Otis, count, Willa. So they counted me, said Otis Marsh, and my 2 hands from the forge, Tandy, and lot they're staying. They said so and they meant it, and I didn't have to ask twice, that's 3. Adelia Fisk. She's 60. She's 60, and she's got a 10 gauge, and she knows which end goes bang. And if you tell her she can't, Mum, she will drive that wagon out here herself and shoot you in the leg. Willa almost smiled. That's 4. Judah 5 you. 6 silence. Otis looked at the burned coop, at the cracked trough still lying in the mud where she had thrown it, because she had left it there on purpose, because she wanted her children to walk past it every single day. 6, he said. Against how many? Willa said nothing, Willa. Against how many, I don't know yet. She looked at him, but Otis. Go home, turned around, say that again. Go home, you've got a wife, you've got a business. This is not your fight, and there is no shame in. And Otis Marsh, who had not raised his voice in 11 years, roared. Don't you dare. The dog started barking. Verity came out on the porch. Don't you dare stand there and hand me a door out. He was shaking. Big man, big hands, shaking. I was 19 at Shiloh. 19, and on the second morning my whole line broke, and I ran, Willa. I ran, his face was wet. I ran 2 miles. And I hid in a creek bed with the water up to my chin. And I stayed there till dark, listening to boys I'd known since I was 6 years old dying in that field. He put his hands on the iron plate. I've been running out of that creek for 18 years. And he picked it up. Alone. 400 pounds of it. And he walked it off that wagon and dropped it in the dirt. I ain't running out of this one. Verity found it, not her mother. Verity, they went back into the canyon on the 11th day. At night this time, because Rafe Caro was a man who put guards where he said he would. 2 of them. Willa put them out of the fight without firing a shot. She simply waited 4 hours until they bored and built a fire. Because a man who builds a fire at night cannot see 15 feet past it. And she and Verity walked around them like they were furniture, into the bowl, into the big tent at the back of it, the one with the folding table. And Verity Hargrove, 16 years old, held a candle stub under a horse blanket and unrolled a map. Mama, Kwama. Willa came over, and she looked at it. And for the first time on the whole of this story, Willa Hargrove did not understand what she was seeing. It was not a plat map. It was not a deed map or a range map or anything a rancher on God's earth would ever have use for. It was a survey, clean drafting, contour lines, elevations marked in a fine engineer's hand, and running through the middle of it in red ink, a long, shallow curve that came up out of the south, ran dead through the North Canyon and came out the other side into the flats beyond, stakes marked at intervals, grades noted in percentages, and in the corner, in printed type, proposed moot, Southstumestern Pacific Extension, survey of 1880, confidential. Verity looked up. That's a railroad. Yes, Mama, that's a railroad. I know what it is. It goes through the canyon. Willa Hargrove put her finger on the red line and traced it and south, through the canyon, north, out, and she felt her children for the last 5 years turn over in the dark like a body rolling in a river. There's no other way through, she said. What? Look at the elevations. His finger moved. Here, that's the cinders. 2,000-foot climb and no water. Here, that's the Devil's Neck. You'd have to blast for 6 miles, and it would take 4 years. She stopped. There is one pass through that ridge. One. And a railroad can't climb like a horse, Verity. It needs a soft grade. It needs water for the boilers. It needs one flat cut through the rock. She tapped the red line. That's the one. There isn't another for 120 miles. Verity's voice came out strange. Then the water. The water's true. And it's not the reason, but in the church you said. In the church I said what I believed. Willa's jaw worked. And I was right about the man, and wrong about the why. She sat back on her heels in the dark. The spring is worth a valley, she said. The pass is worth a railroad. And then she went very still. Verity said, Mama. And Willa Hargrove said, in a voice her daughter had never heard, Corwin found this. He wasn't chasing rustlers. Verity's candle was shaking. He thought he was chasing rustlers. That's what he told me. 6 wagons a month coming through at night. And he figured it for stolen stock, because what else moves at night? Her hands closed into fists on her knees. But you don't move cattle in a wagon, she looked at the map. You move survey equipment. Theodolites, chain, stakes, level rods. You move men in suits who do not want anybody to know where they're standing. Because the second this territory learns where that line is going, every acre it crosses triples in price. She let out a breath. He rode up there with 3 deputies to arrest cattle thieves. Silence. And what he actually walked into, Willa Hargrove said, was a survey crew. They didn't kill him because he saw stolen cows, she said. They killed him because he saw the route. Verity's hand went over her mouth. He was a federal marshal. He could have wired Prescott in an hour. He could have wired Washington. One telegram and Kell's whole speculation collapses because the second that route is public, every homesteader in this valley knows exactly what they're sitting on. And Kell can't buy a chicken coop, let alone a pass. She rolled the map up, slid it inside her coat. So they took his badge off his chest, she said. And they shot him 3 times, and they told this town it was drifters. She stood. 5 years. 5 years I have thought my husband died over a herd of cows. And Verity watched something happen to her mother's face that she did not have the vocabulary for, and never would. He didn't die for cattle, Willa said. He died because he was 5 hours from a telegraph key. They talked it through on the ride home. 2 in the morning, walking the horses, keeping to the soft ground. Why now, Verity said. He's been at this 5 years. Why is he in such a hurry because of the date? What date? Willa pulled the corner of the map out of her coat without unrolling it, and Verity leaned in and read the tiny copperplate at the bottom. Survey of 1880. They surveyed it this spring. That means the company has decided. That means somewhere in a room in Chicago there is a contract on a table, and it says the Southwestern and Pacific will build through Bitter Fork Pass. And it says the right-of-way must be delivered clear of encumbrance. Clear of people. Verity felt sick. He has to hand them a clean deed. Every acre of that right-of-way, signed and titled in his name by a date. And if one homesteader is still sitting on it when that option comes due, the company walks. The company walks. They go around. They spend 4 years blasting the devil's neck. And Augustus Kell, she stopped and did the arithmetic, loses everything. Everything he has put in for 5 years. Every dollar. Every bribe. Every acre he already bought at 40 cents on the dollar. It is all worthless the day that option lapses. She looked at her daughter in the starlight. That is why he burned the Tollivers. That is why he shot through the Hendersons' window. And that's why he'll never stop. No, because he can't. That's right. Willa's voice was almost gentle. He is not a wicked man who could choose to be a good one. He is a man standing on a trapdoor with a clock on the wall. She turned her horse for home, which makes him the most dangerous thing there is. She did it without asking. That matters. Willa never told her to. Willa would have chained her to the stove. But on the 12th day, Verity Hargrove rode into Bitter Fork on the pretext of trading eggs, and she sat in the alley behind Adelia Fisk's boarding houses from 4 o'clock until full dark, and she watched the sheriff's office. And at 8:30, Deputy Clay Rennick came out. He stood on the step and looked up and down that street, not casual checking. Then he went east past the saloon, not into it, and picked up the back trail that ran north toward the old Coulter mine, 2 miles out. Abandoned since '71, Verity followed on foot, downwind, in the shadow of the wash, moving when he moved, stopping when he stopped. Her mother's daughter in the dark, with her heart going like a bird in a box. 6 men at the mine, a fire in the old ore shed, banked low. Horses picketed back in the trees. Verity got in behind a collapsed ore cart 40 feet out, and she lay down in the cinders, and she did not move for an hour. "He's tired of waiting," said a voice, gravel at the bottom of it. "Rafe Caro. The option's got 26 days on it, and he's got 160 acres sitting square in the middle of the right-of-way, with a woman on it. So what's the order?" 2 nights from now. New moon. We go in after midnight. Verity's fingernails went into the dirt. "We fire the house," Caro said. "All 4 corners. She'll come out. And when she comes out, she'll be lit up and we'll be in the dark, and it will take about 4 seconds. And if she don't come out," a pause. "Then it takes about 6 minutes," Caro said. "And she don't come out at all." And Clay Rennick said, "There's kids in that house." Everything stopped. Verity had her cheek in the dirt and her heart in her ears, and she heard him say it. Clay Rennick, 26 years old. Good smile, carried the flower. "There's a boy," he said. "He's 10, silence." "Should have thought of that," Rafe Caro said, before his mama chose a side. "Rafe, this is business." Clay and Verity, lying in those cinders, hated him, hated Caro, with a purity she had never felt for anything in her life. And then Clay Rennick said the thing that changed everything. He said, "Where does the colonel keep his money?" Verity's head came up half an inch. "What?" "The strong box. When he's out at the Ashcombe place. Where's he keep it?" "The hell kind of question is that?" "It's a question, Rafe." A long pause. "You want to be careful," Rafe Caro said slowly. "How you ask that?" "I'm asking because he's got me buying men." Rennick's voice went smooth and easy and reasonable. "And men cost money. And I need to know where the money's coming from, or I look like a fool in front of him. That's all." That's all," said Rafe Caro. And Verity Hargrove lay in the dark and thought, "He's lying." And then she thought, "And Caro knows he's lying." And then she thought, with a cold little drop in her stomach, she did not understand and would not understand for 8 more days. That was not about money for men. That was about the box. She got out clean. She got 2 miles down that trail before she let herself run. Then she ran the whole way to Adelia Fisk's stable, and took a horse without asking, and she rode into her own yard near midnight with the animal blown and lathered. And her mother came out of that house with the Sharps. They're coming. When? Night after next. How many? 6 at the mine. But Mama, Verity got down and her legs gave and she caught the saddle. That's not all of them. That's just the ones he told. Willa Hargrove stood in her yard in her nightclothes with a rifle in her hands. Verity, yes, you went out there alone. Yes, you lay down in the dark inside 40 feet of 6 armed men. Yes, and Willa Hargrove put her arms around her daughter and pulled her in and held her so hard that Verity's ribs creaked, and she said, into her hair, in a voice like gravel through a sieve, "Don't you ever do that again." And then, that was the finest piece of work I have ever seen. And then, and this is the part Verity remembered, her mother started to shake. They did not wait. That was the thing about Willa Hargrove that nobody in Bitter Fork ever understood. Because we had never had cause to, she did not wait. She and Otis rode out at 4 in the morning of the 13th day, and they were on the canyon rim by 9. The bowl was full. 2 wagons. 6 men working, 4 on watch, and stacked along the north wall under a tarp that a man was in the middle of roping down. Barrels. Willa counted them through the glass. 6. Otis put out his hand. She gave him the telescope. 6 barrels of kerosene, Otis Marsh said. That's not for lamps. That's enough to burn a house 3 times over. It's enough, Willa said, to burn a house so fast that nobody inside it wakes up. Otis lowered the glass. We take 'em now. No, Willa. 4 on watch. 6 working and them 6 have got their guns stacked. I can see it from here. Stacked against a wagon wheel like it's a Sunday picnic. 2 of us. High ground. Surprise. And then Kell knows we know, so what? So he changes the plan, Willa said. And I don't get to see the new one. She was already easing back from the rim, and she got exactly 3 feet, and a rock the size of a hen's egg came loose under her heel and went over the edge. It fell 40 feet. It hit a slab, and it rang. Everything happened at once. 10 men looked up. Willa Hargrove had 1 second to make a decision, and the decision was not the one Otis expected. She stood up because here is the truth of Willa Hargrove, and it is the truth of her whole life. She could not hide. She was 6'6". She was on an open rim with 60 feet of bare rock behind her, and the sun at her back throwing a shadow 20 feet long, and there was not one rock in that country big enough to put her behind. She had spent her whole life learning to disappear, and she had never once been able to do it in the open, so she did the only thing left. She stood up, and she let them see her, and she let them see all of her. And for 1 full second, 10 hard men stared up at a giant on a canyon rim with a rifle in her hands, and every one of them just stopped. That second was worth more than any rock. She dropped prone. She had the Sharps up before Otis got his knees under him. 400 yards, slight left draw. Sun behind her, no glare on her glass. Full sun in their faces. Rafe Caro was standing beside the barrels with his hand already going for his gun, and Willa Hargrove's hands began to shake. No, not now. Not now, not now, not now. The front bead came off him, came back, came off. She could feel the whole rifle moving with her pulse. A foot of wander at 400 yards, and 400 yards turns a foot of wander into 10 feet of miss. And 10 feet of miss is a dead blacksmith lying beside her. Breathe. She jammed the forestock down onto the rock, not her hand. The rock. Let the mountain hold it. Let the mountain do what her body could not. Breathe out. Half. The bead came onto Rafe Caro's chest and stopped, and Willa Hargrove moved it 4 inches left onto his shoulder and squeezed. The report went off that canyon like the crack of the world's spine. Rafe Caro went down and rolled and came up hard against a wagon wheel, with his right arm hanging wrong and blood coming through his fingers in a bright, fast pump. His men opened up on the rim, 9 rifles. It was like lying under a hailstorm made of rock chips. And Willa Hargrove worked the block and reloaded and did not move and put her second round through the top hoop of the nearest kerosened barrel. The barrel went over. 60 gallons of coal oil went across that canyon floor, and every man in that bowl quit shooting at the rim and ran for the horses, because there is not one man in this world who will stand next to 60 gallons of kerosene while somebody with a rifle is watching him. "Now," said Otis Marsh, "go." They went off that rim on their bellies and down the scree and onto the horses, when they were a half-mile gone before the first pursuit even mounted. But this is the part that mattered. This is the part that killed 3 men in Bitterfork before the month was out. Rafe Caro, sitting against a wagon wheel with a hole through his shoulder, had watched that rim through the whole of it. And he had seen 2 things. The first was the shot, 400 yards, downhill. And she had taken him in the shoulder, 4 inches off a heart shot. And no man alive makes a 4-inch error at 400 yards by accident. That is not luck. That is not a lucky woman with a dead man's gun. That is placement. She had chosen not to kill him, and Rafe Caro, who had been shot at by professionals on 3 continents, sat in the dirt and understood with absolute clarity that a woman he had threatened on a saloon porch had held his life in her hand for 1 second and had given it back to him. And the second thing was this. Before she fired for maybe a second and a half, while she was getting into it, the rifle had been moving. He saw the barrel wander. He saw it wander a foot. He saw her jam it down onto the rock, like drunk racing on a bar. And Rafe Caro, who had spent 4 years in a war and 11 years after it hiring men who came out of that war broken, knew exactly what he was looking at. He knew that shake. He had had it himself in '66 for a year and a half. Rafe Caro rode into Bitter Fork that evening with his arm in a sling and his shirt cut off him and a bandage strapped so tight he could not turn his head. He walked into the parlor of Adia Fisk's Spulsersine, where Colonel Augustus Kell had been staying for 11 days. A thing that stuck in Adelia's craw so badly. She spat in his coffee every single morning, and he stood in front of the colonel, and he did not sit down. Augustus Kell was 55 years old, Union cavalry, Gettysburg. He had the citation in a frame, and he brought it out for company. A big man gone soft in the middle and hard in the eye. He wore his hair long, the way he had in '63, and he had a habit of clasping his hands behind his back and rocking on his heels while other men talked. He was rocking now. "Report she's on the rim, who is the widow." Kell stopped rocking. "She put a round through me at 400 yards, Caro said, downhill in a crosswind, and she blew the top hoop off a kerosene barrel, the second one, before my boys had their rifles up." Silence. How many were with her? 1. The blacksmith? 2 people, 2. Kell's face did not move, and 9 of my men ran. "Yes, sir, from 2 people. From a rifle," said Rafe Caro, "that they could not see, and could not answer, and could not run out of range of." Kell walked to the window. Walked. Once. Twice. "Who is she, Caro?" "I don't know. You don't. I know she was Army. I know she was a scout. I know it was Apache country. And I know she is better than any man I have ever hired, or fought beside, or run from." He said it flat. No heat in it, like reading a bill of lading. "Colonel, I'll tell you plain. If she'd wanted me dead this morning, I did. She had me, and I shmogo." And Augustus Kaskir turned around. Anne's face had changed because a thing had just occurred to him. "She let you go?" "Yes, sir. She had the shot. And she took your shoulder?" "Yes, sir." And Augustus Kell smiled. "Say that again." Kell said, "She took my shoulder." "No." Kell came across. "The other thing. What you said in the hall to Voss. Say it to me." Rafe Caro's jaw tightened. He did not want to say it. He would think about the fact that he said it for Vestersuak's natural life. He would still be thinking about it as an old man in Oregon in 1911, and he would never once forgive himself. But he was a hired man, and he had business asked questioned by the man who paid him. "Her hands shake," he said. Kell went very still, When she's got a man in her sights, Caro said. Before the shot, the barrel wanders. She had to brace it on a rock to hold it. Soldier's heart, that's what they call it. So she cannot kill. And Rafe Caro said, and this is the sentence. Right here. This is the one that dug 3 graves. She can shoot. Colonel, he looked at the floor. She just can't kill. Augustus Kell laughed. He laughed out loud in the parlor of a woman who hated him, with a hole in his hired gun standing 3 feet away. And Adelia Fisk heard it through the kitchen wall and stop up with her hands in the dishwater. Then it is nothing, he said. Caro, it is nothing. You have been beaten by a broken woman with a good eye, sir. She is a scarecrow. She is a rifle with nothing behind it. She will shoot the hat off my head and put a hole in my barrel. And by God, she will not put a round through my chest because she cannot. Because the war took it out of her. And I have seen 40 men like that. And every last one of them died on their knees. He was rocking again. Faster, 6 men. You said 6 were going 2 nights at. That was the plan. And Augustus Kell said 30. Rafe Caro's head came up. Sir, 30 men. Colonel, there is every need. The smile was gone. And what was under it was exactly the thing Willa Hargrove described in the dark. A man on a trap door with a clock on the wall. I have 24 days. And a signature waiting in Chicago. When 160-acre square in the middle of my right-of-way, with a woman sitting on it who has made me the joke of this territory. He came up close, and she made it public. She stood up in a church. Every dirt scratcher in that valley is watching her now. And if she stands, they stand. And if they stand, I am ruined. He walked to the door. I don't want her dead, Caro. Dead's a martyr. Dead is a story people tell for 100 years. He put his hand on the knob. I want 30 men to ride into that yard in front of God and the whole valley. And I want that woman to walk out of her house with her hands over her head in front of her children. He opened the door, and I will be there myself, Augustus Kell said, to watch her do it. The attack that was set for the 14th night never came. Karaserzen was gone. 4 of his men would not go back into that canyon at all. And Kell needed a week to bring the rest, so he waited. And he sent word out along the Prescott Road and down to the border camps. And men came in 3s and 5s. And he paid them in gold. And he told them there was one woman and a burned-out farm. Sheriff Amos Dell came out to Kettle Spring on the 16th day. He came alone. In the open. In the middle of the afternoon, with one hand raised so they would see him coming from a long way off. Judah Fenn tracked him the whole way through a rifle scope from the barn roof, and never said a word. Dell got down. He stood in that yard and took his hat off and turned it around in his hands. Mrs. Hargrove, Sheriff, I can't help you, I know. He looked at the ground. I want you to understand something. I have been sheriff 11 years, and I have got a deputy on Kell's payroll, and I know he is on Kell's payroll, and I have not got one single thing I can prove. And the day I arrest him is the day I find out how many men in Prescott are on that same payroll. He stopped, and I have got a wife. He was crying, 58 years old, standing in a burned yard, holding his hat. I've got a wife, ma'am. Willa Hargrove said nothing. She let him have it. All of it, the whole shape of it, because she had been a coward too for 5 years. And she knew exactly what it weighed. And she was not going to stand in her own yard and pretend she didn't. Then Amos Dell reached into his vest, and he took out a badge, tin, 6-pointed, Deputy stamped across the face. The pin on the back bent from being put on and taken off too many times. He held it out. Officially, he said, I got no authority to appoint a woman. Willa looked at it. Officially, I got no authority to appoint anybody without the territorial court. And the territorial court is 3 weeks' ride. And I have not gotten an answer out of them since March. He pushed it at her. But a sheriff in this territory has the right to raise a posse. Any citizen. Any number. Whenever there's a felony in progress or reasonably anticipated, he looked up at her. And if that posse happens to include folks with military experience, well, that'd just be prudent, wouldn't it? Willa Hargrove took the badge out of his hand. It disappeared entirely inside her fist. You know what you've just done, she said. Yes, ma'am. When they come, and they will come, and men die in that yard, that badge makes it lawful. And it puts it on you. Yes, ma'am. They'll ruin you, probably. She looked at him a long moment. Amos, ma'am, come stand with us. And Amos Dell put his hat on. and got up on his horse and did not answer her. He rode about 20 feet, then he stopped. He sat there with his back to them for a good 10 seconds. And then he turned around in the saddle and said, "I'll think on it." And he rode away, the 17th day. Evening. Willa sat her daughter down at the kitchen table with the sharps broken open in front of her, and a box of cartridges beside it. Loaded. Mama, loaded. Verity loaded it. Dropped the first one. Got the second one in backward. Got the third one right. Again. She did again, then faster, again, faster, again, and again, and again. Until she could do it looking at the wall. Until she could do it in the dark. Until she could do it with her mother shouting in her ear. 40 minutes, 200 repetitions. Then Willa closed the box. "That's your job. That's it? That's it, Mama. I can shoot. You cannot shoot. I've shot rabbits since I was—" "You have shot rabbits." Willa Hargrove leaned forward, and she took her daughter's face in one hand, the whole face, the way you would hold an apple, and she made her look. "Listen to me, Mama, listen. A rabbit is not a man." Verity went quiet. "Rabbit does not have a face. Rabbit does not have a mother. A rabbit does not look at you in the last courser's second. And understand, her hand did not move, and I am telling you right now, Verity Hargrove, that they do. They look at you and they know. It takes about a fifth of a second, and you see the whole of it. Silence, and you will carry that face for the rest of your life. Not tonight, not this year. You will be 41 years old, standing in a kitchen, buttering bread, and it will come up out of the floor at you and take your knees out from under you, and you will have to put your hand on the table." She let go. "I have 11 of them," she said. "Mama, 11. And I can tell you what every one of them was wearing." She sat back. "You load. I shoot. That is the arrangement, and there is no other arrangement. And if you argue with me about it one more time, I will put you on the mail coach to Prescott in the morning, and you can hate me from there." Verity said nothing. "Say it, I load. And you shoot. And—" Verity's chin came up, "And if you fall, I take Ephraim and I go." Willa Hargrove looked at her daughter for a long, long moment. "That's right," she said. And she got up and went out onto the porch and stood there in the dark for 2 hours. And when Verity looked out the window, at 11 o'clock, her mother was still standing there, both hands on the porch rail, squeezing it, trying to make them stop. They came on the 20th night, but on the 19th, before all of it, there was one more evening, and I want to tell you about it, because it was the last one. Adelia Fisk drove out in her buggy, with a ham and 4 loaves of bread, and a 10-gauge shotgun that's on this beside her like a passenger. Otis Marsh came with Tandy and Lot. Judah Fenn came down off the barn roof and drank Willa's coffee and made a face at it. And they sat in that yard, 6 of them and 2 children, in the long gold light of a September evening, and they ate. Nobody talked about it. That is the thing. Nobody said one word about kerosene or rifles or Augustus Kell. Otis told a story about a mule. Adelia Fisk told Verity, in strict confidence, that Ellis Wexford had wet himself in 1873, and she had the story from his own wife. Judah Fenn taught Ephraim how to whistle through a blade of grass. The dog got a ham bone, and Willa Hargrove sat on her own porch step with her elbows on her knees and watched all of it, and did not say one word, because she was doing arithmetic. Adelia is 60. Adelia goes in the root cellar with the children, and she does not come out. Otis at the barn corner. Otis is the strongest man here, and the barn corner is the hard corner. Judah on the roof. Judah has one eye, and that eye is better than both of mine. Tandy at the well. Lot at the wagon. Verity at the kitchen window with 200 rounds, and me she stopped, and me wherever they aren't, looking. Ephrem came and sat down beside her. He did not say anything. He just leaned into her side, all 49 pounds of him, and she put her arm around him, and he disappeared into it entirely. "Mama, is it going to be bad?" Willa Hargrove, who had lied to this town for 5 years, who had lied to her daughter about her husband's death, who had built her whole life out of one enormous careful lie, looked down at her 10-year-old son and told him the truth. "Yes," she said. He nodded. He did not cry. He just nodded, like she had told him it was going to rain. And then he said, "Are you scared?" "Terrified. You don't look scared. That's the trick of it," Willa said. She looked out at the ridge. The sun was going down. Behind it was all schools going the color of a struck match. Being brave isn't not being scared, F. Anybody who tells you that is selling something. She pulled him in tighter. Being brave is doing the thing while you're scared. That's all it ever was. That's the whole of it. The boy was quiet a while, then. Papa was brave. Yes, he was. Did it help? Willa Hargrove sat on that porch step, with the fire going out of the sky, and her arm around her son. And she could not think of one single thing to say. At midnight, Judah Fenn came down off the roof. He sat down beside her with a grunt and a crack. He did not speak for a while. Then 26 what? Riders, he spat. Camped 4 miles north on the Ashcombe Flat. Fires, he worked his jaw. I counted 26. I ain't got but one eye. So call it 30. Willa Hargrove sat very still. 30, she said. 30. Against 7. Against 7. Judah Fenn agreed. And one of 'em's 60. And one of 'em's me. He looked at her sideways with a good eye. Girl, don't. You told me once you'd never pick that thing up again. I know what I told you. Judah Fenn nodded slowly. He looked out at the dark, where 26 fires were burning 4 miles north. You know what I like about you, Willa Hargrove? No, neither do I, he said. But I rode 100 miles to find out. He hauled himself up, every joint in him complaining. Tomorrow night. You get any sleep at all. You're a fool. I won't. Good. And Judah Fenn climbed back up onto that barn roof, 70-some years old, with a rifle in his teeth, and settled in behind the chimney. And he did not come down. Bertram Voss died at 7 o'clock in the morning, in a rented room, with his collar off and his shaving brush still in his hand. One shot. Through the window. Through the back of the head. Delia Fisk heard it from her kitchen and stood there with a skillet in her hand, and did not move for a full minute, because she had heard a thing like that before, a long time ago, in Pennsylvania in a letter. Then she went up the stairs, and she opened the door. Sheriff Amos Dell was there in 11 minutes. He stood in that little room with his hat in his hands, and he looked at the body, and he looked at the window, and he looked at the angle. He was not a clever man, but he was not a stupid one either. The shot had come from the livery roof across the street, 90 yards, through a half-open window, into the back of a man's skull while he stood at a mirror. And then he saw the two things on the floor. The first was a cartridge case, big, fat as a man's thumb. Amos Dell picked it up and turned it over and read the head stamp and felt something go out of him, 50/90 sharps. There was exactly one rifle in Bitter Fork Valley that took that cartridge. Everybody knew it. I had ordered the ammunition for it special, out of a catalog, and grumbled about it in my own store for 5 years. And I had sold every box I had of it to Willa Harb 16 days before. The second thing was worse. It was lying in the middle of that floor, in the open, where a man walking in could not possibly miss it. A badge, Federal Marshal. Tarnished, the pin bent. The number stamped on the back worn so smooth you had to hold it to the light. And Amos Dell held it to the light. And he read the number. And he sat down on the edge of a dead man's bed with his hat in one hand, and Corwin Hargrove's badge in the other, and said, out loud, to nobody, "Oh, you son of a bitch." He rode out to Kettle Spring at 10 o'clock with 4 men behind him, because he had to have 4 men behind him, and every one of them was somebody's cousin, and not one of them wanted to be there. They came up that trail slow, and when they crested the rise, Judah Fenn was on the barn roof, and Otis Marsh was standing in the yard with a hammer in his hand, and Tandy and Lot were at the wagon, and Willa Hargrove was on the porch. Nobody raised a gun. Nobody had to. Amos Dell got down. He came halfway across that yard and stopped. Willa, Amos, Bertram Voss is dead. Nothing moved. Shot through a window at 7 this morning, from the livery roof. 90 yards. Willa Hargrove said nothing. They found a 50/90 casing on the floor. Still nothing. And they found Corwin's badge, and that moved her. Her head came around. And Amos Dell, who had known this woman 5 years and had never once been afraid of her, took a step backward without meaning to. Say that again. His badge, Willa. His marshal's badge. Laying in the middle of the floor. Verity was in the doorway. That badge is in the cedar box, she said. In the bedroom. It's been in there since. She turned and ran. And they all stood in that yard and listened to her run through the house, and listened to a lid come up, and listened to the silence after it. She came back out. She was white. It's gone. And then Verity Hargrove's sleeves went out from under her, and she sat down hard on the top step, because she had just remembered 4. Minutes, 4 minutes, on a morning 11 days ago, when a young man with a good smile stood alone in her mother's house, taking an official statement about a chicken coop. Willa. Dell's voice cracked. Willa, I have got 4 men behind me, and a dead lawyer in town, and a piece of your husband's chest laying on the floor next to him. And I have got to bring you in. Sheriff, Otis started. I have to bring her in, he was shouting. I do not believe that that man ever shouted in his life before or after. Don't you think I know? Don't you think I can see it? His whole face was coming apart. Somebody walked into that room and put that badge on that floor for me to find, and I know it. And it don't matter one damn bit because there is a dead man, and there is evidence, and I am the law, and I have got— He stopped. He put his hand over his eyes. I have got to bring you in, he said. And Willa Hargrove came out onto that porch in his stocking feet, 10 years old, and he looked at the sheriff, and he looked at the 4 men, and he looked up at his mother, and he took hold of her skirt with both hands. Willa Hargrove set her rifle down on the porch rail. Mama, Verity, Mama, no, take your brother inside. And she walked down off that porch, in front of her children, with her hands out in front of her. The hoofbeats came up that trail at a dead gallop. Every man in that yard spun, and Rafe Caro came over the rise on a lathered gray, with his right arm strapped across his chest and his hat gone, and his shirt half undone from the bandage, riding one-handed, riding badly, riding like a man who had not stopped in 11 miles. He hauled that horse down so hard it sat back on its hocks. Don't, Amos Dell said. Caro, don't. He got down. He nearly went over. Lot caught his elbow, and Caro shoved him off. It wasn't her. Nobody breathed. Voss died at 7, Caro said. 7 this morning. 90 yards. Livery roof. How do you know what time? Because I have been asking, Sheriff. Because I have spent 3 hours asking every soul in that town what they heard and when they heard it. And it was 7 o'clock. And this woman was not in bitter for 7 o'clock this morning. You can't know that. And Rafe Caro turned and looked at Willa Hargrove. And he said, in a voice that had gone strange, because 7 days ago she put a bullet through my shoulder from 400 yards. Silence. And she chose the shoulder. He looked back at Dell, Sheriff. I have known killers. I have been one. I have hired them by the dozen and buried them by the half dozen. And I am telling you, as a man who knows the trade, a woman who takes a man's shoulder at 400 yards when she could have taken his heart, then walk into a boarding house and shoot an unarmed lawyer in the back of the head while he is shaving. His jaw was working. That is not her. That is not the shape of her. Then who? Dell said, where's your deputy? Nobody in that yard said a word. Where is Clay Rennick, Sheriff? Amos Dell opened his mouth, closed it. He didn't come in this morning, he said slowly. I figured he was. He isn't coming in. Caro reached into his coat with his good hand and threw a crumpled paper into the dirt at Dell's feet. The colonel's strong box was opened last night. $11,000. Gone. And the man who opened it knew the combination because Kell gave it to him in June. Because he trusted him, he looked around that yard. Because everybody in this valley trusts Clay Rennick. Verity Hargrove made a sound. Everybody turned. She was standing on the porch with both hands over her mouth. The box, she said. What? The box! She came down the steps. She was shaking. At the mine, 8 days ago, he asked you where the colonel kept the strong box. And you told him to be careful how he asked that. And I heard it. I heard every word of it. She stopped. And I didn't understand. He was never Kell's man, Rafe Caro said. Not really. He was Kell's man for exactly as long as it took to learn where the money was and how the whole thing worked. He looked around, and then he needed the 2 of us gone. Both of us. Kell's gun and the woman who had made herself the symbol of everything standing in Kell's way. So he kills the lawyer, Wilsa said. So he kills the lawyer, and he frames me, and he frames you. Caro's mouth twisted, and the sheriff hangs you. And Kell goes down for hiring the men who drove you to it. And I go down as the man who pulled the trigger on half of it. He spat in the dirt. And Clay Rennick rides to Denver with $11,000 and a clean name. And there is nobody left alive to say different. Amos Dell stood in that yard with the dead man's badge in his fist and looked at the ground. 11 years, he said. Nobody answered him. 11 years. And he sat on my left hand every day of the last 4. He turned around. He looked at his 4 cousins sitting on their horses. Go home, Sheriff, go home, they went, and Amos Dell watched them go. And then he opened his fist and looked at Corwin Hargrove's badge, with the number worn nearly smooth. And he put it in Willa's hand. That's yours, he said. And then he took off his hat and set it on his saddle horn, and he unbuttoned his coat, and he said, Where do you want me tonight? Here is what Willa Hargrove did with the daylight she had left. She turned the freight wagon over. Alone, Otis Marsh had been rigging a block and tackle off the barn beam for Wessenting, cursing, running rope, and Willa walked past him and put her shoulder under the bed of that wagon and set her feet in the dirt and lifted. 2,000 pounds of oak and iron. It came up. It came up to her chest, and it hung there for one long second, while every tendon in her went to wire, and her heels up those dirt, 8 inches deep, and she turned it over. It went down on its side with a crash that shook the porch, and every soul in that yard just stopped and stared at her. She stood there breathing. Then she said, Otis, fill it, and she walked away. They filled that wagon bed with bags and the iron plate and every sack of grain on the property, and it made a wall across the mouth of the yard 4 feet high and 40 feet long. Any man coming at that house from the north would have to come around it or over it. She put Otis at the barn corner. She put Adelia Fisk in the root cellar with the children and the 10-gauge and a lamp she was not to light. She put Tandy at the well. She put Lot at the wagon. She put Judah Fenn on the barn roof behind the chimney. She put Amos Dell in the doorway of the house with a shotgun and a badge. And she put Verity Hargrove at the kitchen window with 200 rounds and a table to lay them on and one job in this world. I load, and you shoot, and Verity's chin came up. And if you fall, I take Ephraim and I go. Willa Hargrove looked at her daughter for a long moment in the lamplight. Then she said, You are the best thing I ever did. And she walked out into the dark. They came in from the north at midnight under a sky like a closed hand. No moon at all, clouds sitting low on the ridge, no lanterns, no talking, just the sound of 30 horses at a walk in soft dirt, which is a sound like nothing else on this earth. Like the whole world clearing its throat. They spread wide at 400 yards. They came on at 200. When at 150 yards, Augustus Kell rode out in front of them and stood up stirrups and shouted at that house. Willa Hargrove, the yard was black. Come out, nothing. Come out with your hands raised, and your children live. You have my word as an officer. And Judah Fenn, 70-some years old, lying behind a chimney with one good eye, said quietly to nobody at all, Oh, you idiot, because Augustus Kell was standing up in his stirrups at 150 yards in front of 30 men, with a voice like a bell, telling everybody in that yard exactly where he was. The first shot came from the barn roof. It missed Kell's head by 4 inches and took the hat clean off him and killed the man behind him. And the night came apart. I am not going to tell you it was a battle. It was not a battle. It was a slaughterhouse in the dark, and it went on for 4 hours, and there was no glory in any part of it. 30 men came at that house. The first hour, they did it right. They dismounted at 200 yards and came in on foot in 3 groups, and they laid down fire on that house so heavy. It took the glass out of every window in the first minute and chewed the front door to kindling. They were not ranch hands. They were border men and old soldiers, and Kell had paid them in gold, and they walked into a killing ground, because Willa Hargrove was never in the same place twice. She fired from behind the wagon and moved, fired from the well and moved, fired from the roof of the smokehouse, and dropped off the back of it and was gone before the return fire chewed those shingles to splinters. 6 shots in 4 minutes, 6 men down, and not one of them dead. Every single one shot through the thigh, through the shoulder, through the hip, the arm, and every single one of them screaming. And here is the thing Willa Hargrove knew that Augustus Kell did not. A dead man is quieted. A wounded man screams, and his friends have to go and get him. She was not killing them. She was taking them out of the fight 2 at a time. By 1:30, 7 of Kell's 30 were on their backs in the sage, and 4 more were dragging them out, and nobody had gotten within 60 yards of that porch. And Verity loaded. Verity Hargrove knelt at a kitchen window in the dark for 4 hours, with her hands going numb, and her mother appeared and disappeared, and appeared again at a different window, black with powder, saying nothing, taking the loaded rifle, handing back the empty one. Not one word passed between them the entire night. There was no need. At 2 o'clock, Kell burned the smokehouse. And everything changed because now there was light, 40 feet of burning pine throwing orange across that whole yard. And every position Willa Hargrove had built in the dark was suddenly a position with a shadow. And a shadow 20 feet long. 4 men came around the burning smokehouse at 2:15. They came fast and they came low, and they were not coming for the house. They were for the barn corner. Because behind that barn corner, 20 feet down, set into the ground, was a slanted wooden door. The root cellar, Adelia Fisk, Ephraim Hargrove, and an 11-year-old boy from the Hale place who had run out from town at dusk and whom nobody had even known, was down there until an hour before. Otis Marsh stepped out from behind a 1/4-inch iron plate that was doing exactly what he had made it to do. And he stood in the open in front of that cellar door, with a shotgun in one hand and a blacksmith's hammer in the other. And he did not move, not one step, not 1 inch. They shot him 5 times, and he was still standing when the 5th one hit him. He killed 2 of them. The other 2 ran. He went down on his knees on that cellar door, and he stayed there. When they found him at first light, he was still on his knees with his shoulder against the wood, holding it shut. 19 years old at Shiloh, 50 at Bitterfork. He never ran again. At 3 o'clock, Willa Hargrove ran out of ammunition. She was behind the overturned wagon, and the box beside her was empty, and the rifle in her hands was empty, and there were 200 rounds sitting on a table in that kitchen 60 feet away across open, burning, wide-lit ground. 60 feet, and she was 6'6", and the smokehouse was throwing light like a furnace door. Now where to hide? Nothing to hide behind, nothing. There is no version of this where they do not see me. There is no version of this where they do not see me, so let them. She stood up, and she ran, and 11 men opened up on a giant crossing a burning yard. And I have talked to 2 of them since in a bar in Yuma, and both of them told me the same thing, they said. She was so big, we all aimed at her, and every one of us aimed at the middle of her, and she was moving. And the middle of a running woman's size is not where you think it is. She took around through the meat of her left arm, and around, through her skirt, and around that went through the flesh above her hip, and out the back, and she did not stop, and she did not slow. And she came through that kitchen window in a shower of glass and landed on the floor beside her daughter, with the whole side of her dress going dark. And Verity Hargrove looked at her. And Willa Hargrove said, "Load." Judah Fenn died on the barn roof at 3:30. He killed 4 men from behind that chimney, and he wounded 6 more. And he stayed up there for 3 hours in the open while 30 men shot at a stack of brick. And at some point in the last of it, a round came through the mortar and took him in on the chest, and he did not come down. He rolled onto his side and kept working the lever. Willa found him at first light. He had 5 cartridges left, laid out in a neat little row on the shingles beside his hand. He had put them there deliberately. He had been laying them out in a row like that since he was 20 years old. When on his face, and Willa Hargrove would swear to this until the day she died, was grinning because he had ridden 110 miles at 70-some years of age to find out why he liked her. And he had found out. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Amos Dell walked out into the middle of that yard. Why? Nobody knows why. Willa was at the kitchen window with a hole in her hip. Verity was on the floor beside her with a box of cartridges. Tandy was down, and Lot had dragged him by the well. And Amos Dell, 58 years old, no chin, a wife in town, a badge on his chest he had been ashamed of, walked out of the doorway of that house into the open, with a shotgun in his hands. And he stood up in the middle of that yard, in the firelight, in front of everybody, and he shouted, "This is the law." 6 men shot him. He got 3 of them anyway, 58 years old. He had never once fired that gun at a living man, and he got 3 of them standing up in the open, in the middle of a burning yard. He went down on his back with his arms out, and the badge was still on his chest. Willa reached him at 4:20. He was still alive. He looked up at her, and his mouth was full of blood, and he said one thing. He said, "Tell my wife I stood." Clay Rennick came back. That is the part nobody ever guesses. He had $11,000 and a 2-day head start and a clean road to Denver. And at 4:30 in the morning, with Kell's men broken and running, and the fight all but done, Clay Rennick rode back into Bitter Fork Valley. Because he was not finished. Because as long as Willa Hargrove was alive, there was one person in this world who could stand up in a courtroom and say what she had worked out. And because he had wanted, very badly, for a very long time, to be the one who did it, he came in on foot from the south, through the sage, behind the smokehouse, behind the well, and I found her kneeling in the yard beside Amos Dell P. rifle in the dirt. Both hands pressed down on the sheriff's chest, and she was shaking, not the war shake, the other kind. He put the pistol against the back of her head. "Don't," he said. "She did not move, I want you to know," Clay Rennick said, and his voice was pleasant. It was pleasant. It was the very same voice that had said "no harm done," ma'am, on her porch 2 years ago, with her soaking child in his arms. "I want you to know I really did like the pie." The shot came from the kitchen window. Verity Hargrove was 16 years old. She had loaded that rifle 200 times at a kitchen table, with her mother shouting in her ear. She had never fired it, not once. 60 feet, no lamp, dark room. Her mother's back, and a man standing over her mother's back. She braced the forestock on the windowsill, because that is what her mother had done on a canyon rim 7 days before, and she had watched her do it, and she had never forgotten it. She breathed out, half, and she took the whole world in her 2 hands and squeezed. Clay Rennick was dead before he landed. Verity came out of that house. She got about 8 feet, and then she went down on her hands and knees in the dirt and was violently, helplessly sick, and she could not stop. And she was still holding the rifle. She would not let go of the rifle. Both hands locked around it, while her whole body tried to turn itself inside out. Willa Hargrove crawled to her daughter through the dirt, and the blood, and the spent brass, and she took her, and she held her, and she said, the only thing there was to say, "I'm sorry," and again, "I'm sorry, baby," and again, and again, and again, in rocking her in the dark in that yard, while the barn burned behind them. "I'm so sorry." He did not run. Give him that. History gives a man very little, and it ought to give him that. Augustus Kell stood in the middle of Willa Hargrove's yard, at first light with his coat off and his horse dead behind him, and 22 of his 30 men down or gone. And he did not run. He stood there, and he waited for her to come. She came, out of the smoke, out of the gray. 6'6" of her, black from the crown of her head to the hem of her dress. Blood down her left arm and blood soaked through the whole left side of her skirt, carrying her husband's rifle in one hand. She stopped 15 feet from him. "Colonel, Mrs. Hargrove, say it." He knew exactly what she meant. He did not pretend otherwise. That was the last decent thing Augustus Kell ever did. "I gave the order," he said, out loud. "I gave the order to kill your husband." His chin came up. September of 1875, in the North Canyon. He had seen the survey, and he was 5 hours from a telegraph key. "I gave the order." He looked her in the eye. "And I have not lost 1 hour of sleep over it in 5 years. "Silence," he begged, Kell said, and Willa Hargrove raised the rifle. It moved. She had him. 15 feet. She could have thrown that rifle at him and killed him. 15 feet, and the front bead came onto Augustus Kell's chest, and then it wandered off his chest, and came back, and wandered off again. "No, no, no, no. Not now, brace it. On what? On what? There's no rock. There's no rail. There's nothing. Her arms were shaking so hard the barrel was drawing circles in the air. And Augustus Kell watched it happen, and he began to smile. "There it is." Nothing, said nothing. "There it is." He spread his hands. "Caro told me. Caro said she can shoot, but she cannot kill. And I brought 30 men out here on the strength of it." He took a step toward her, and by God, he was right. Another step. "You are broken, madam. You are a rifle with nothing behind it." Willa Hargrove backed up. She backed up 1 step, and her heel hit something. Wood. It was the fence, the north fence line sign, the one she walked every single morning of her life. Well, fence, livestock, small rituals, the kind that keep a homestead breathing. The top rail, peeled cedar. Set in 1873 by a man 5'8", who had to stand on a nail keg to drive the top pins and who got it dead level anyway, all 400 feet of it. Because he was a careful man, and he wanted his children to have something square in a crooked country. Corwin Hargrove built that fence with his own 2 hands. Willa Hargrove turned. She laid the forestock of that rifle down across the top rail of her husband's fence, and she leaned into it, and her hands stopped. They just stopped. Both of them. All at once. Dead steady, way they had been at 1,100 yards in the summer of '63. The way they had not been since a morning on a ridge in the cinders when she chose to let 15 men live. She looked down the barrel, and Augustus Kell was standing in the front beat as still as a photograph. The whole valley was watching by then. We had come out at first light. Every one of us. The ones who sold and the ones who didn't. 24 people, standing at the edge of that yard in the gray with the smoke going up behind them. And Rafe Caro, on a horse at the back, with his arm in a sling. Nobody moved, said one word, and Willa Hargrove with a dead sheriff in her yard, and a dead blacksmith on her cellar door, and a dead old man on her barn roof, with a bullet hole through her hip, and her 16-year-old daughter, kneeling in the dirt behind her, holding a rifle she would never again pick up without thinking about it. Willa Hargrove had Augustus Kell in her sights at 15 feet, and her hands were steady. And there was not one soul in this world who would have blamed her. She said, "Put your hands up." Kell blinked. "What?" "Put your hands up," Willa Hargrove said, "and you will be tried in Prescott. And you will hang in Prescott, and it will be lawful. You are mad. Hands, you have nothing. No sheriff, no marshal, no court, you have a dead." And Willa Hargrove reached into her coat with her left hand, and she pinned a badge on, tin, 6-pointed. The pin bent from being put on and taken off too many times. Amos Dell's badge. She had taken it off his chest an hour before. While he was still warm, deputy, she said, was sworn by Sheriff Amos Dell of Bitterfork on the 16th of September. In front of witnesses. Her voice never rose. Hansen's colonel and Augustus Kell went for his gun. She shot it out of his hand, 15 feet. The pistol was clearing leather. She put a .50 caliber ball through the frame of it, and it came apart in 3 pieces, and took 2 of his fingers with it. Kell went down, screaming, and Willa Hargrove walked over to him. She reached down, and she took him by the collar with one hand, the whole of him, and she picked Augustus Kell up off the ground, and she carried him across that yard, past the burning barn, past the overturned wagon, past Amos Dell lying on his back with his arms out, his boots dragged the whole way. 24 people watched it, and not one of us ever forgot it. She threw him down in the mud in front of us, and she stood over him 6'6", black with powder, bleeding through her dress, a dead man's star on her chest and a dead man's rifle in her hand. And she said, loud enough for the whole valley to hear, "My husband died believing in the law." Kell was clutching his hand and sobbing in the mud. "I could end you right here," Willa Hargrove said, "and this whole territory would call it justice. And I would sleep like a stone." She looked around at us, at all of us, at me. "But he believed," she said. "He put his gun down in that canyon and he offered you a day. And you shot him for it." She let it. "And if I kill you now, then he died for nothing." She dropped the rifle in the mud. "So you'll hang," she said, "in a courthouse, with a jury, in front of a judge." She turned her back on him and walked away, because that is what he was for. And then she stopped. She stopped, and she turned around, and she looked at the man on the gray horse at the back of the crowd, and the whole valley went quiet. Caro, Rafe Caro, dead, did not move. "You were at the fire," Willa Hargrove said. His face did not change, but something behind it did, in the cinders. 5 years ago. 3rd night. You were sitting on the west side with your back to a rock and you had a cup in your left hand. Nobody breathed. You did his voice, she said. And Rafe Caro closed his eyes. You made him beg, she said. You made him high and thin, and you made 50 men laugh at a man who had been dead 9 days. Her voice did not rise. It never once rose. And I had you at 600 yards the next morning. And I put 3 shots in the dirt at your feet. And I have not been able to hold a rifle since. Rafe Caro got down off that horse. He got down badly, with one arm, and he almost fell, and nobody helped him. And he stood in the mud in front of her. I've been afraid of that ridge for 5 years, he said. I know. I thought it was a ghost, I know. He looked at the ground for a long time. Then he said, what do you want? And Willa Hargrove said, ride to Prescott. Turn yourself in. testify silence against him? Against all of it, Rafe Caro laughed. One breath of it, no humor anywhere in it, they'll give me 20 years. Probably, ma'am, I'd sooner you shot me, I know you would, Willa Hargrove said. And that was the whole of it. That was the sentence she passed on him, I know you would. Rafe Caro stood in that mud for about 10 seconds. And then he picked her rifle up out of the mud and wiped it on his own coat, one-handed, and handed it back to her butt first. And he got on his horse, and he rode to Prescott, and he told a federal investigator every single thing he knew for 4 days, and signed all of it. They gave him 14 years in Yuma. He served 11. And there is a thing about that man I have never been able to square, and I have had a years to try. He could have run. He had a horse and a head start, and every reason he did not run. He rode to Prescott because a woman he had wronged past, all forgiving, looked at him in a burned yard and told him what he owed, and he paid it. I do not know what to call that. I only know that it happened, and that I watched it, and that I have never once in my life been asked to pay anything so dear. We buried Otis Marsh, Judafen, and Sheriff Amos Dell under the old oak at the north edge of the Kettle Spring homestead on a gray September morning. Willa Hargrove dug the graves herself. She had a hole through her hip and a hole through her arm, and she would not let one single man in that valley put a shovel in that ground. It took her all day, and the whole valley came out to look. I walked up beside her at that fence line with my hat in my hands, and my hands would not stay still. And I asked her the only thing I could get my mouth to make, "Is it done?" Her eyes never left the ridge. "It's done." And she did not look at me. That was the worst part. She did not look at me, and I understood exactly why, and I have carried it for 11 years. But there is one more thing about that morning, and it is the reason I am telling you any of this. At the graveside, Otis Marsh's widow got up off her knees in the grass, and she walked over to Willa Hargrove, 5'1", 60 years old, half the size of that woman's shadow, and the whole valley held its breath, because every soul standing there knew that Otis Marsh had died on a cellar door in that woman's yard. Ruth Marsh looked up, and she said, "He came home." Willa did not understand. "He got out of that creek," Ruth Marsh said. "After 18 years. He got out of that creek," and she took Willa's enormous hand in both of hers and held it. "Thank you," she said. The federal investigator came out of Prescott 11 days later. Then 2 more behind him. Then a man from the Interior Department who did not smile once in 4 weeks. They found the survey map in Willa Hargrove's coat. They found the option contract in a safe in Chicago. They found 3 territorial judges, a land commissioner, and a clerk in the Surveyor General's office. And by the following spring, not one of them was in office, and 2 of them were in Yuma, the Southwestern and Pacific never built through Bitter Fork Pass. They went around. It took them 4 years, and it cost them a fortune, and they did it. And this valley stayed exactly what it was. They offered her the star in October, the territorial court in writing, with a seal on it. Deputy Sheriff, Bitter Fork District. They sent a man out with the papers, and he stood in that yard and read them out loud and asked for an answer. Willa Hargrove stood on her porch, and she looked out at her land. The barn was going back, up. The wagon was upright. The chicken coop was new, and the trough was still cracked. Still lying in the mud where she had thrown it, she never moved it. Not once. In all the years I knew her. "My husband died believing in the law," she said. "The man from Prescott waited, and 3 good men are in that ground. Because there wasn't enough of it out here." She held out her hand, and they gave her Amos Dell's star. The same one. Tin. Bent pin. They had polished it, and they had left the bend because somebody in Prescott understood something. And whoever he was, he deserves to be remembered too. She pinned it on, and she went back inside her own house, and she did not duck. She never did again. They went up to the ridge in November, the one where Corwin Hargrove had asked her to marry him standing on a tree stump so he could look her in the eye. Because he was 5'8" and she was 6'6", and he thought that was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anybody in the history of the world. Willa Hargrove told her daughter that story for the first time, and Verity laughed until she cried, and then just cried. Then Willa took the sharps out of its case, and she held it out. Verity looked at it. "She did not take it, Mama." "I don't. No, I don't want it. I know you don't." Willa Hargrove crouched down, all that way down, until their heads were level the way they were on the porch step. The only place in the world where their heads were ever level. Neither did I, she said. Neither did your father. She put the rifle in her daughter's hands. The gun does not make you dangerous, Verity. She closed the girl's fingers around it. The choosing does. She stood. And that choice, Willa Hargrove said, should never once, in your whole life, be an easy one. Verity fired. She missed. Badly. She fired again. Missed. By the 10th shot, she was on the paper. By the 20th, she was hitting it. And at the 40th, she set the rifle down on her own and said, "That's enough for today." And her mother said, "That's right." Augustus Kell was hanged in Prescott on a Tuesday morning the following March. There was a crowd. There is always a crowd. Willa Hargrove was not in it. She was home, on her hands and knees in the wet spring dirt, setting a new post in the north fence line, because the old one had a bullet in it, and because a fence, if you want it to hold, has to be square. Ephraim Hargrove came running up the thin rail at dusk that summer with the dog behind him. He hit his mother at a dead run and wrapped both arms around her leg, 11 years old now, head to her belt buckle, and he did not let go. And he did not look around to see who was watching, and he was not one bit ashamed. Somewhere in those months things had happened, in Bitter Fork, so slowly, that nobody noticed her it. The giantess? We stopped saying Oko's big mistake, and the men who used to say it got quiet when it came up, and then it stopped coming up at all. We called her Willa, and when a man in this valley had trouble, he did not ride 3 weeks to Prescott. He rode out to Kettle Spring. And he took his hat off in that yard, and he said, "Deputy Hargrove," and she came to the door, and she did not duck. I have thought about that woman every day for 11 years. I think about the 5th row of that church. I think about my hands on my knees and my eyes on the floor. And I think about a giant crossing a burning yard at 3 o'clock in the morning, with 11 rifles on her, because there was nowhere on God's earth for a woman that size to hide, and she went anyway. She spent her whole life trying to be smaller. When it came down to it, the only thing that saved this valley was that she could not be. The moon came up, on the first quiet night, and the whole valley went silver. The homestead stood. The graves rested. And on that porch sat a woman with a son on one side, and a daughter on the other, and a dog at her feet. And the whole enormous country stretched out in front of them. And it was free. Tell us a story, Mama. Willa Hargrove looked out at the ridge for a long, long moment, and this time she told them the truth. All of it, the column out of Fort Whipple. The girl they laughed at, the tobacco left out on the rocks, the 3 shots in the dirt, and the mercy that cost her hands. The rifle under 200 pounds of feed sack. 5 years of ducking through her own front door. Every word. Some stories end in triumph. Some end in tragedy. This one ended in survival. And out here in a country that kills the careless and has never once apologized for it, that is a victory.